Good evening, night wanderers. You found your way back to the quiet corner of the airwaves, where the world is hushed, and only the dark keeps us company. Some of you are listening in bed, eyes heavy but not yet closed. Some of you are driving down empty roads, headlights carving tunnels through the fog. And some of you have nowhere else to go but here. Tonight I'll share with you 7 stories. Each one a fragment pulled from places where silence runs too deep, where shadows lean too close, where something waits just beyond the edge of comfort. You won't find blood and gore here. No sudden screams to tear you from your rest. Just stories that creep slowly, quietly, until you realize they've settled inside you. So, take a breath, dim the lights, and if the walls around you creak or the phone rings at an hour it shouldn't, don't worry. It's probably nothing. Probably. Story 1. The Midnight Caller. The clock in David's apartment had stopped keeping time. At least, that's how it felt to him. The hands still moved, but in a sluggish, mocking rhythm that refused to carry him closer to morning. Nights stretched until they seemed endless, a gray current he drifted through without ever reaching shore. He had tried every trick: melatonin, blackout curtains, the steady hiss of a white noise machine. Nothing silenced the restlessness. He would lie on the couch, staring at the city through his half-closed blinds, traffic lights pulsing red and green across wet pavement, the occasional hiss of a bus braking at an empty stop, the drone of tires on asphalt far below. The world outside seemed half asleep, but David never joined it. Insomnia wasn't new to him. But the calls were. The first one came on a Tuesday. His phone lit up at 3 a.m. sharp, vibrating against the coffee table with a buzz that felt too loud for the hour. The screen glared a name he had never seen before. Unknown. He almost ignored it. Almost. But curiosity has a way of slipping past fatigue, and his thumb brushed the screen before his mind caught up. No greeting. No background noise. Only the faint sound of breathing. Slow. Steady. Measured. Like someone counting seconds between each exhale. Hello? David's voice sounded raw, like it had been dragged out of him. The breathing didn't stop. He sat up, clutching the phone closer, every nerve sharpened by exhaustion. The silence stretched until it became unbearable, until it felt less like silence and more like pressure, like someone pressing their palm gently against his ear. Then, a sigh. Long, heavy, almost mournful. David hung up. The screen went dark, but the sound lingered, not in the phone, in his head. And when the call returned the next night, at the exact same time, he understood. Whatever this was, it wasn't going away. At first he tried to laugh it off. A prank caller. Some teenager with too much time and an app that could block caller ID. He told himself that explanation over and over, like a lullaby. He wanted to believe it, but a lullaby only works if you can close your eyes, and David's wouldn't close. The third night he let the call ring out. The phone rattled across the table with each vibration, then fell silent. His heart didn't slow until the screen dimmed again. For a moment, he felt relief. But when silence pressed in, thicker than before, he found himself wishing the phone would ring again just to prove he hadn't imagined it. It rang the following night, 3 a.m. on the dot. Always 3. This time he answered on the first ring. His hands were damp with sweat. Again, the breathing. Steady. Patient. As though whoever it was knew he'd come back. Stop calling me. His voice cracked halfway through. He hated that. He wanted to sound firm, to sound like someone in control. But the words slid out broken, unsure. Nothing. Just the sound of lungs filling and emptying. Who are you? Silence. He strained to hear something: footsteps, voices, the hum of a TV. Anything that would anchor the caller to a real world, a real place. But there was nothing except that breath, steady as a metronome. And then, another sigh. This time, David didn't hang up right away. He pressed the phone tighter, until the cold glass warmed against his cheek. He thought he could almost feel it an exhale against his skin. He shuddered, cursed softly, and ended the call. Days blurred. David worked in a small advertising office downtown, a job built on deadlines and fluorescent light. He sat through meetings like a ghost, nodding at the right times, sipping bitter coffee that never seemed strong enough. His coworkers noticed the shadows under his eyes, the way he rubbed his temples as though something unseen pressed there. Rough night? One of them asked casually. Yeah, David muttered. Couldn't sleep. He didn't mention the calls. Not yet. Saying it out loud would make it real in a way he wasn't ready for. By the end of the week, exhaustion carved him hollow. His reflection in the elevator mirror startled him. Pale skin, bloodshot eyes, the faint stubble he hadn't bothered to shave. He avoided looking at himself after that. At night, the calls came without fail. He began to anticipate them, staring at the phone in the minutes before 3, pulse quickening as if he were bracing for a blow. Sometimes he answered, sometimes he didn't, but it made no difference. The calls always came, and with each one, the sigh grew heavier. On the 7th night, David tried something different. He answered and said nothing. He pressed the phone to his ear and listened, willing himself to breathe as slowly as the caller did, matching rhythm for rhythm. The silence stretched. The sigh came. And then, faintly, something new. A whisper, too soft to make out. David froze. He sat perfectly still on the couch, afraid even his heartbeat would drown it out. He held his breath until his chest ached, straining to catch the shape of the words, but they slid away, like something spoken through water. He thought, though, he couldn't be sure that it had been his name. A click ended the call. David dropped the phone onto the table as though it had burned him. He stared at it, waiting for it to light up again. But it didn't. The screen remained black. His reflection glared back at him, warped and tired. He stayed awake until morning, the phantom sound of his name chasing him through the hours. By Sunday, the phone had become the only thing that mattered. He couldn't stop checking it, couldn't stop waiting. He thought about leaving it switched off, but the idea made his stomach knot. If he turned it off, the caller might find another way through. A worse way. At 3 a.m., the phone lit up. His heart jolted. His hand shook as he reached for it. This time, he swore he heard it clearly. A woman's whisper, carried on the breath like a secret too heavy to hold. David. And then the line went dead. That night, David sat in the dark, long after the call ended, staring at the blank ceiling above him. His chest felt heavy, his breath shallow, as though something unseen had stepped into the room and taken up space beside him. For the first time in weeks, he wished he could dream, because dreams, no matter how bad, end when you wake. But whatever this was, it only began when the night was deepest. And David knew, with a certainty that made his skin crawl, that the voice wasn't finished with him yet. David began to dread the clock more than the call. Each night, as the red digits blinked closer to 3, a tension pulled tighter in his chest. By 2:58, he would sit rigid on the couch, phone in hand, waiting like a man bracing for thunder. He told himself he wouldn't answer, not this time, but when the screen lit up known, his thumb always betrayed him. The first word came on the 10th night. At first, it was only the breathing again, steady and unhurried. He closed his eyes, thinking if he didn't look at the dark apartment around him, he could convince himself it was nothing more than a glitch, a phantom signal bouncing between towers. Then the whisper arrived, soft, female, as though it had slipped in between the spaces of each breath. Let it on, David. Let it on. And the words sank into him like ice water poured directly into his chest. He shot upright, the phone trembling in his grip. What? His own voice cracked, fragile in the silence. Who is this? Nothing but breathing. He pressed the phone tighter. What do you mean? What are you? The line went dead. He sat frozen for several seconds before he realized he was whispering to himself. It's not real. It's not real. It's not real. But it had been real. He knew it. Not just the words, but the way they had curved around his name, curling into his ear like someone had leaned close enough to taste his fear. Work became impossible. His mind wandered back to the phrase again and again. Let it end. He stared at spreadsheets and forgot the numbers the moment his eyes left them. Colleagues spoke and their words blurred into a meaningless hum. In the elevator, he caught himself studying the steel cables through the grate above, imagining the sound they might make if they snapped. On the train home, the thought returned. A different image this time. Tracks stretching into blackness, a horn too close, too fast. David shook his head hard enough to draw looks from nearby passengers. He rubbed his temples, muttering under his breath. He hated how easy the words echoed in his mind, how they wrapped themselves around every passing moment of silence. Let it end, David. Let it end. That night, he tried to outsmart the call. He left his phone in the kitchen and sat on the balcony with the city stretched out beneath him. The air was sharp with cold, and the light smeared into streaks of color through his tired eyes. He wrapped his arms around himself and waited. At 3, he heard it. Not the phone. Not this time. The whisper rose behind him, close enough that he felt the warmth of breath against the curve of his neck. Let it end. He spun, nearly toppling the chair. The balcony was empty. The sliding door was locked. The apartment behind him lay dark and still. His pulse roared in his ears. He rushed back inside, snatched the phone from the counter. The screen was dark. No missed calls. No notifications. But when he pressed the phone to his ear, desperate, the line was already open. Breathing. Let it end, David. He hurled the phone across the room. It struck the wall and clattered to the floor. The sound echoed too loud for the hour, as though the building itself had flinched. The line was still open. He didn't need to pick it up to know. He could feel the voice vibrating in the air of his apartment, as if the walls themselves carried the call. Sleep abandoned him completely. He lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, afraid of the dark corners of the room. Shadows stretched and shrank with the passing headlights outside. At times, he thought he saw movement in the corner by the closet. A shape, faint, like the outline of someone waiting. When he turned his head to look directly, nothing was there. He whispered into the silence, half in prayer, half in defiance. Not me, not tonight. But silence didn't answer. Silence was no longer his. The calls didn't stop. If anything, they grew bolder. Sometimes the phone would ring earlier, at 2:45, or later, at 3:10, as if testing his vigilance. Sometimes he wouldn't hear the ringtone at all, only the click of the line opening and the weight of a sigh in his ear. And always, the words, "Let it end," not shouted, not pleaded, simply offered, like a suggestion. David began to avoid mirrors. He didn't like the way his reflection looked at him, as though it knew the voice better than he did. One night, when the whisper came again, he shouted back, "Stop it. Stop saying that." His voice broke in the dark, and the sound felt foolish even as it left his mouth. But the voice paused. For the first time, it changed. The whisper became almost tender. "It will be easy, David. Easier than you think." The line clicked dead. David sat trembling, his phone slick in his hand. The thought came unbidden. If the voice knew it would be easy, maybe it was right. He pressed his palms against his ears, desperate to block it out. But the words had already taken root. Easier than you think. That night, David dreamed for the first time in weeks. He dreamed of ropes hanging from his ceiling, swinging gently in a wind that wasn't there. He dreamed of water rising slowly over his body while a woman's whisper drifted just above the surface. When he woke, the sheets were damp with sweat, and his phone lay beside his head. The screen was dark, but in the silence, he swore he heard a sigh. Not from the phone, from the room itself. David stopped trusting silence. It had once been a thin comfort, the background against which the calls arrived. Now, silence itself felt tainted, like a stage cleared for something waiting to step forward. He caught himself glancing over his shoulder in elevators and stairwells, even in the fluorescent-lit bathroom at work. He thought he saw shapes at the edge of his vision, a figure at the end of a corridor, the tilt of a head glimpsed through a train window. Every time he turned, there was nothing. The voice, however, didn't leave him. It had moved past the phone. Sometimes he heard it between the hum of traffic, woven into the rush of passing cars. Sometimes it curled up from the drain when he brushed his teeth at night, soft and insistent. Let it end. Once, when he closed his eyes in the shower, steam thick around him, he swore the whisper came from just behind the curtain. He tore it open, soap burning his eyes, and found only the empty tiles. But the impression lingered, the way you can still feel the shape of a dream long after waking. By the 12th night, David's nerves were shredded. He hadn't eaten properly in days. His stomach clenched at the thought of food. Coffee kept him upright, but only barely. His reflection in the bathroom mirror looked less like himself and more like a stranger wearing his skin, the hollows beneath his eyes sinking deeper every morning. That night, when 3 o'clock drew near, he decided he wouldn't answer. No matter what happened, he would let the phone ring out. He turned the ringer volume down, placed the phone face down on the coffee table, and sat in the dark with his fists clenched. The call came. Even muted, he could feel the vibration shudder through the table. Once, twice, 3 times, then silence. Relief fluttered weakly in his chest. He had won. He had denied it. And then, in the hush that followed, he heard the sigh inside the room. David froze. Slowly, mechanically, he turned his head. A figure stood by the wall, darker than shadow, its outline barely human. No features, no details, just a blurred absence of light shaped like someone standing still. For a long moment, neither of them moved. David's breath scraped in and out of his throat, shallow and uneven, while the figure's shoulders rose and fell with the calm rhythm he had come to dread. Then the whisper drifted across the space between them. "It will be easy, David." The shadow raised its arms. Something pale stretched taut between its hands. Rope. David stumbled backward, knocking over the coffee table. His phone skittered across the floor, screen lighting up as if mocking him. Unknown. The call had never stopped. He snatched the phone up and hurled it at the figure. The device passed through empty darkness, striking the wall with a crack that splintered the silence. The figure wavered, shivered like smoke disturbed by a gust of air, then stilled again. The rope dangled loosely now, one end brushing the floor. "It will be easy." David bolted for the light switch, slamming it up. The room flooded with harsh yellow glow. The figure was gone. Only the overturned table remained, his belongings scattered across the carpet. The phone lying cracked but still glowing faintly. His lungs clawed for air, each breath cutting his throat. He pressed his back against the wall, sliding down until he was sitting, knees pulled up, staring at the spot where the figure had stood. The phone's screen flickered, then went dark. He didn't sleep at all. He kept every light in the apartment on, every door open. He paced from room to room, muttering to himself, trying to convince his body he was safe. He didn't believe it. Every time he passed a mirror, he avoided his reflection. He feared that if he looked too long, he'd see someone else standing behind him. When dawn came, it felt unreal, like a false sunrise painted just for him. He staggered into the shower, clothes still on, letting the water soak him as though it could wash away what he'd seen. It didn't. At work, his coworkers no longer asked if he was all right. They avoided him. His laughter, when it came, was too brittle, his silences too heavy. He caught one colleague glancing at his wrists during a meeting, as if expecting to see something there. That night, he tried to leave. He stuffed clothes into a bag, grabbed his keys, and rushed to the elevator. His hands shook so badly he dropped the keys twice. The elevator descended with agonizing slowness, cables groaning in their track. He kept his eyes fixed on the floor number display, afraid to glance at the mirrored wall. He knew what he'd see if he looked, not just his own gaunt reflection, but another figure behind him, holding the rope. The doors slid open onto the lobby. For a moment, relief surged through him. He strode across the tile, almost running, pushing through the glass doors into the cold air. The city stretched before him, streets empty, neon buzzing faintly above shuttered shops. But the sound followed him out. A sigh. Behind him, he spun. The lobby stood empty, the security desk unoccupied, the chairs aligned in perfect rows. The phone in his pocket buzzed. Unknown. The whisper slid into his ear without him answering, as if the phone itself had dissolved the barrier between worlds. "It will be easy, David. Easier than you think." He stumbled back into the street, clutching the phone, chest heaving. Cars hissed by in the distance, but the city around him seemed stripped of life. Windows stared blankly. No pedestrians passed. It felt like he was the last person awake in a dead metropolis. His legs buckled beneath him. He sat on the curb, phone pressed to his ear, though he had never answered. His breath clouded in the air, mingling with the steady, patient rhythm of the caller's breath. And for the first time, David realized he was tired of resisting. The voice wasn't wrong. It would be easy. The apartment no longer felt like his. David had lived there for nearly 5 years. He knew the quirks of its aging walls, the way the pipes groaned in the early morning, the flicker of the bathroom light when the switch wasn't pressed just right, the faint chemical tang that clung to the carpet no matter how often he vacuumed. He knew it all, but that night when he stepped inside, he felt a stranger's breath linger in the air. The lock clicked behind him, and with that sound came the realization. The space had shifted, not in furniture or in structure, but in atmosphere. The air was thick, damp, as if the very walls had been sweating in his absence. A faint draft slid across his skin, though no window was open. The overhead light above the entry buzzed with a sickly hum, the bulb straining to stay alive. David froze in the doorway, clutching his keys in one hand like a weapon. He told himself he was being irrational, but the sensation persisted. Someone had already entered before him. Someone waited. His gaze fell to the coffee table. The phone still lay there where he had left it, fractured screen gleaming faintly in the half-dark. Across the jagged glass, the single word pulsed, steady as a heartbeat. Unknown, it hadn't stopped. The buzzing had blended into the fabric of his nights, like the hum of the refrigerator, like the low groan of the elevator cables. He had stopped hearing it, stopped noticing, but it had been there all along, vibrating faintly against the wood, waiting for him to return. He bent down slowly, each joint stiff with tension. The moment his fingers brushed the cold glass, the voice bled through not from the speaker, not from the earpiece, but from everywhere at once. "It will be easy, David. Easier than you think." The words weren't whispered anymore. They were breathed directly into him, vibrating in his ribs, soaking through muscle and bone. He staggered back, clutching the phone to his chest as though pressing it tighter might silence it. But the voice spread further, spilling into the room, slipping between the cracks in the drywall, curling up from the carpet fibers, blooming in the stale air like mold. The walls seemed to lean inward. The overhead bulb flickered. His shadow stretched unnaturally long, bending across the floor like a limb reaching out to grasp him. No more waiting. No more wait. Just let it go. His eyes drifted upward against his will. The ceiling fan hung above the couch, blades slowly turning with the inertia of some phantom draft. He watched it creak on its axis, the screws straining against old plaster, and he imagined the rope. The rope looped neatly over the fixture, fibers coarse but inviting, swaying gently though no air moved. The image planted itself with sickening clarity, as if someone had already prepared it for him. His stomach twisted. He forced his gaze away, stumbling toward the kitchen. He wanted water. He wanted noise, something, anything, to drown out the whisper. His hand shook as he reached for the faucet. The pipes rattled, coughed, then released a weak stream. The sound was thin, fragile, no match for the voice that still threaded through his head. Its lighter on the other side. The faucet sputtered, then fell silent. And in that silence, David heard another sound. Breathing, not his own. He turned. The shadow stood in the living room. It was closer this time, no longer a smear of absence in a distant corner. It had taken shape, taller than him, shoulders broad, but faceless, as though someone had carved a human outline out of the night itself and left it standing upright. The edges blurred slightly, shifting like smoke, but there was weight to it. It occupied the room. In its hands hung the rope. Not imagined now, real. Fibers coiled thick and pale against the blackness of its form. The end brushed the carpet, leaving no mark, no sound, just the memory of what it could do. David's throat constricted, his mouth opened, but no words came. He stepped backward, hip striking the counter hard enough to send pain lancing through his side. Still, he couldn't look away. The figure tilted its head. The movement was deliberate, patient, almost curious. The whisper arrived not from the phone still clutched in his hand, but directly from the figure. "You're tired, David. Tired of fighting." The air chilled, sharp enough to sting his lungs with each breath. He could smell it now, too. Damp rope, the metallic tang of rusted iron, the faint sourness of sweat soaked into old wood. The scent clung to him, filled his nose, coated the back of his throat. He wanted to scream, to run, but his body refused. His knees quivered, legs heavy as though weights had been strapped to them. The figure stepped forward, once, twice. The floorboards didn't creak beneath it, but David swore he felt each step tremble through his own body, as though its movements resonated with his bones. His heart pounded against his ribs, too fast, too shallow. His thoughts spiraled into fragments. Don't look, don't breathe, don't. But the rope brushed the floor with a sound like fabric whispering against stone, and the noise hooked into his chest, dragging him back. The phone buzzed in his hand. He glanced down. The screen glowed with a distorted image, his own reflection in the cracked glass. Only it wasn't his face exactly. The eyes were darker, deeper, sunken, until they looked bottomless. And behind him, faint but unmistakable, stood the shadow, rope looped neatly over one arm. His own voice spilled from the phone, warped and stretched as though played from a broken tape. "Not me. Not tonight. Not me. Not tonight. Then, layered atop it, the whisper. You don't have to fight, David. Just lean into it. You'll see how easy it island. Tears stung his eyes. His chest heaved. He thought of all the mornings he had sat staring at the same four walls, the endless nights hollowed out by silence. He thought of his desk at work, the meaningless deadlines, the polite smiles of colleagues who would forget his name within a year of his absence. He thought of his parents' gravestones, the weight of grief that never lifted, the way loneliness had crawled into his bed each night like an unwelcome lover. Maybe it is easier, he thought. Maybe this is what's supposed to happen. The figure stepped closer still, rope swaying. The whisper pressed against his skull until it wasn't just a sound, but a sensation, cool fingers tracing the inside of his mind, curling around his will, tugging gently. It's time. The rope lifted. David's body moved without his consent. His feet shuffled forward, drawn as if by a current too strong to resist. The carpet scratched his soles. His hand still clutched the phone, though his knuckles had gone white, bloodless. He could feel the figure's cold radiating now, a void so dense it bent the warmth from the air. He tilted his head back, eyes locking on the ceiling fan above. The screws groaned, plaster crumbling faintly around them. He imagined the loop tightening, the chair tipping, the brief, blessed silence after the struggle ended. The tears broke free, streaming down his face. His lips moved. Maybe I want this. The whisper purred approval. Yes, that's it, let it go. Something in him rebelled. It wasn't strength. It wasn't courage. It was panic, pure and raw, clawing through his chest. The thought struck like lightning. If he stepped forward, he would vanish. Not just die, but vanish. No one would remember. No one would even care. No, he rasped. The figure tilted its head again. The rope swayed gently, questioningly. David's throat burned. His chest convulsed. The word tore itself free. No. The scream ripped through the apartment like a blade. It cracked his voice, shredded his throat, and yet it rang louder than anything he had ever said. It bounced off the walls, echoed down the hallway, rattled the very light bulbs above. The shadow recoiled. Its edges wavered, smoke unspooling in all directions. The rope frayed, fibers splitting, unraveling as though a great hand had pulled it apart strand by strand. David hurled the phone to the floor. It shattered, sparks bursting briefly before dying into silence. The light overhead blazed suddenly, so bright it seared his eyes. He threw an arm across his face, blinded. When the glare faded, the room was empty. The figure was gone. Only the slack rope remained, curled like a dead snake on the carpet. David collapsed onto the couch, body shaking uncontrollably. His chest heaved with ragged sobs that tasted of iron and salt. Every muscle trembled with exhaustion. He didn't know if he had won or merely delayed what waited. The apartment hummed with silence now, thick and absolute. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of something that had retreated, watching from just beyond the edge of perception. He sat like that until dawn, the first gray light seeping through the blinds. His eyes burned, his throat throbbed with pain, but he was alive and still terrified, because in the hollow between heartbeats he could still feel it. The whisper hadn't left, it was only waiting. Morning came, but it did not bring relief. David sat in the kitchen with every light blazing, blinds pulled open to let in the weak gray dawn. His hands trembled around a chipped mug of coffee that had long gone cold. The apartment hummed faintly, refrigerator motor, distant traffic, a neighbor's shower. The ordinary sounds should have anchored him. They didn't. They sounded foreign, like background noise piped in from another world. The rope still lay in the living room where the shadow had dropped it. He had tried to move it, but when his fingers brushed the coarse fibers, a jolt of nausea surged through him, and he recoiled as though the rope had bitten. Now it remained there, coiled loosely on the carpet, a silent accusation. The phone was gone. He had swept the shattered pieces into a trash bag and shoved it down the chute before sunrise. But sometimes, in the hum of the appliances, he thought he could hear it vibrating still, faint, persistent. He hadn't closed his eyes all night. His body begged for sleep, but he resisted. He knew instinctively that if he let go, if he drifted, the whisper would return, waiting behind the curtain of unconsciousness, ready to slip in. Hours stretched thin. He moved from room to room, turning on every lamp, every overhead bulb, as if light alone could keep the dark at bay. The electricity meter ticked frantically, but he didn't care. He could not afford shadows. When night returned, he braced himself. The city outside softened into twilight, then bled into black. His apartment glowed unnaturally bright, like a stage under interrogation lamps. 3 o'clock arrived. The clock on the microwave blinked 3. David sat rigid in the armchair, muscles cramped, breath shallow. He stared at the spot where the shadow had stood the night before. The air was heavy, tense, as though the room held its breath with him. The phone did not ring. No vibration. No sigh. Nothing. Minutes dragged. 10. 20. The silence grew unbearable, yet no sound intruded. By 3:30, he felt tears prick his eyes. Relief, fragile and fleeting, threatened to overwhelm him. Had it ended? The following nights followed the same pattern. No calls, no whispers, only silence. But silence, he had learned, was not absence. It was pause. He caught himself listening too closely, leaning into the quiet as if expecting to hear breathing layered beneath. In the corner of his vision, he thought he saw the rope shift slightly on the carpet, fibers curling inward as though guided by invisible fingers. When he blinked, it was still again. He told himself to throw it away, burn it, do something. Yet each time he approached, his chest tightened, and he retreated. Some part of him knew that discarding it wouldn't matter. The rope was not the source. It was a token, a reminder. One evening, exhausted from vigilance, David sat at the window watching the city. Neon flickered across the wet pavement below. Pedestrians hurried under umbrellas, their lives intact, oblivious. For a moment, he envied them. For a moment, he almost wished the call would return. At least then he would know what he was fighting. Instead, he had only silence. Silence that pressed against the glass. Silence that filled his chest until he thought he might suffocate. He whispered to himself, barely audible, "I said no. You heard me. I said no." His reflection in the window stared back, pale, hollow-eyed. Behind him, the apartment stretched in yellow light, empty, but in the faint sheen of the glass, he thought just for an instant that another shape stood there too. Taller, featureless, rope looped casually around its hand. He spun, heart hammering. The apartment was empty, only the rope on the floor, only silence. David never answered another call. He kept the lights burning night after night, forcing himself awake with bitter coffee and shaking hands. The days blurred, and people at work whispered about him now. But he didn't care. He knew what waited in the dark. And though the phone no longer rang, though the whisper no longer slid across his ear, he felt it waiting, patient, eternal. One day, when the exhaustion grew too heavy, when his vigilance cracked, he knew it would return. Not as a voice through the line, but as a breath on his neck. Story 2. The Frozen Ferry. Snow had a way of swallowing the world whole. Sarah realized this as she gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles pale against the faint glow of the dashboard. The storm had arrived earlier than forecast, thick curtains of white slamming across the road, blinding her headlights until it felt like she was driving through endless static. Her wipers thrashed back and forth, but the snow only thickened, piling at the edges of the glass faster than she could clear it. The radio had died an hour ago. Her phone, too, no signal, just the battery icon bleeding down toward red. The only sound left was the whine of wind slicing against the car, and the muffled roar of tires struggling over ice-slick pavement. She was supposed to be home by now. Home, where the old heater in her apartment coughed but still worked, where the kettle could whistle her back into warmth. Instead, she was crawling along a road she barely remembered, deeper into a winter that seemed determined to erase every trace of direction. Her GPS had frozen before it died, the screen stuck on a jagged arrow pointing toward nothing. She followed the last set of instructions scribbled on a sticky note from a coworker. When you reach the lake, take the ferry. It'll save you an hour. The lake. She hadn't seen it yet, but she felt it. A vast darkness looming beyond the line of pines, its frozen expanse invisible beneath the storm. The road ended abruptly at a rusted gate, half buried in snow. A wooden sign leaned drunkenly against the fence, its paint flaking, letters faded but just legible in her headlights. Ferry crossing, winter route. Sarah hesitated, engine idling. Her breath clouded the windshield. The idea of a ferry running in this weather felt absurd. But where else could she go? Turning back meant retracing hours through roads already half buried. She killed the engine, pulled her coat tighter, and stepped out. The cold hit her like a wall. It wasn't the sharp sting of fresh snow, it was older, heavier, a cold that had settled into the land and decided never to leave. It clawed past her layers, numbing her fingers, even through thick gloves. The path to the dock was barely visible, only a suggestion of trampled snow between drifts. She followed it, boots crunching, her breath breaking into ragged clouds that disappeared instantly into the storm. When she reached the dock, she almost thought she'd been mistaken. But then she saw the boat. The ferry crouched against the dock like a slumbering animal, low and wide, its paint flayed by decades of winter. Chains creaked against the posts as it rocked ever so slightly on the black, frozen water. A single lantern burned near the prow, its flames small and shivering. And beside it stood the ferryman. He was old, older than the boat, older than the lake. His coat hung in tatters around him, the fur trimmed stiff with frost. His beard spilled down his chest in a sheet of white, icicles dangling like ornaments. His eyes, when they lifted to meet hers, were pale and unreadable, the color of snow pressed too long beneath ice. Sarah swallowed. "Is it running, in this weather?" The ferryman's mouth curled just enough to suggest a smile, though it never reached his eyes. He nodded once, slow, deliberate, and gestured toward the deck. She hesitated, glancing back toward her car, a dark lump, half lost in the storm, then stepped forward. The planks groaned beneath her weight, slick with frozen spray. As she boarded, she realized she wasn't alone. Figures huddled along the benches lining the deck. Men and women, all dressed in heavy coats and scarves, faces obscured. None spoke, none shifted. They sat rigid, hands folded, eyes downcast. Snow dusted their shoulders, unmelted, as though their bodies gave off no heat at all. Sarah offered a small, nervous smile to a woman near the railing. The woman didn't respond. Her skin, in the dim lantern glow, looked strangely pale, almost translucent. Sarah moved quickly to an empty bench and sat, pulling her coat tighter. The cold was worse here, worse than on the dock, worse than in the car. It pressed into her bones, gnawed at her lungs with every breath. She tried to rub warmth into her hands, but her gloves felt stiff, unyielding, as if her fingers were no longer entirely her own. The ferry lurched. Chains clanked. Slowly, with a sound like ice fracturing beneath pressure, the boat pushed away from the dock and drifted into the dark expanse of the lake. The storm dulled as they moved forward. Snow still fell, but softer, like sifted ash. The water, or ice, she couldn't tell, stretched in all directions, flat and endless, reflecting only the dim glow of the lanterns. There were no waves, no ripples, only a glassy surface disturbed by nothing. Sarah glanced around at the passengers again. No one spoke. No one shivered. Their stillness unnerved her more than the cold. It felt rehearsed, staged, as though they had been sitting there a very long time, waiting. Her teeth chattered. She turned to the man beside her, a broad-shouldered figure with a scarf wound tight around his neck. "It's freezing, isn't it? Don't you feel it?" He didn't answer. Slowly, he turned his head toward her. His eyes were pale, his lips tinged blue. He opened his mouth as if to respond, but only a tremor came, his jaw quivering. His teeth clicked faintly, not in chatter but in something slower, more deliberate. Sarah recoiled, heart lurching. The man turned away again, staring out across the lake. The ferry pressed deeper into the frozen dark. Sarah hugged herself, trying to keep her mind focused on home, on warmth, on anything beyond the ache, spreading through her chest. Yet the silence pressed in, broken only by the creak of the boat and the faint rattle of chains. The storm no longer raged, it watched. The ferryman stood unmoving at the helm, hands gripping the frozen wheel, his lantern flickering weakly against the shadows. Sarah could not shake the feeling that they weren't crossing the lake. They were drifting deeper into something else. And though she told herself not to look, she couldn't resist one more glance at the passengers. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow. Frost clung to their lashes, and though no breath fogged from their mouths, each chest rose and fell in perfect unison, like a single body wearing many forms. Sarah pressed her lips together, forcing her gaze down to her own gloved hands. She could no longer tell if the trembling came from her or from the cold air around her. But she knew one thing with sudden, gut-wrenching certainty. The ferry was not carrying her home. It was carrying her somewhere else. The cold was not just cold anymore. It had personality. It had intent. Sarah wrapped her arms around herself, squeezing tight, as if she could trap what little warmth she had left inside her chest. She rocked slightly on the bench, whispering under her breath, "It's just the storm. It's just the storm. It's just the storm." But the words didn't help. They came out brittle, shattering against the air before they could reach her ears. The numbness in her hands spread into her forearms. She flexed her fingers inside her gloves, desperate for sensation. Nothing. It felt like moving dead wood. Her legs trembled, not from shivering, but from weakness, as if the muscles were beginning to forget how to hold her upright. She looked again at the passengers. Their stillness pressed on her like a weight. They were statues carved from frost, unmoving, unblinking, their silence louder than a crowd's roar. Sarah's breath hitched. She wanted to scream at them, to beg for help, to demand an explanation, but some instinct told her she would regret waking their attention. She forced herself to imagine warmth. Grandma's blanket, the little gas heater by the window, steam rising from cocoa, cinnamon on top. But the images wavered, flickered, then vanished. It was like trying to remember a dream after waking just as she reached for them. They slipped away, leaving only the taste of snow and the ache of cold. Her teeth chattered uncontrollably. She clenched her jaw until pain shot into her ears. She whispered again, hoarse this time, "I'm alive. I'm alive. I'm alive." The man beside her moved, just slightly. His gloved hand brushed hers. The contact burned like dry ice. Sarah recoiled, clutching her hand to her chest, but the damage was done. She could feel the warmth bleeding from her, seeping out as if the touch had created a crack in her skin. The cold surged in through that crack, invading, claiming territory. Her heart lurched, beating faster to fight it back, but each thud was weaker than the last. The man's lips parted. A sound slipped out, a sigh mixed with a rattle, as if the air in his chest had frozen and shattered on the way out. Sarah's stomach clenched. She wanted to cry, but the tears stung, crystallizing at the corners of her eyes before they could fall. Panic clawed at her throat. She shot to her feet, boots scraping against the icy planks. The noise seemed to echo far too loudly in the oppressive stillness. Dozens of heads turned toward her, slowly, unnervingly synchronized. Dozens of eyes fixed on her. Her mouth opened. Words tumbled out in a rush, desperate, stumbling. I don't belong here. Do you hear me? I'm not supposed to be here. I just needed to cross. I just needed to get home. Please." Her voice cracked. The silence that followed was unbearable, stretched taut like ice about to break. She almost wished they would speak, even if it was to curse her, even if it was to name what they were. Anything would be better than this absence of sound. And then, one by one, they turned away again, their movements mechanical, rehearsed, as though she had interrupted a ritual, only momentarily. Their stillness returned. Sarah's leg buckled. She collapsed back onto the bench, pressing her fists into her eyes until stars danced behind the lids. "Stay calm, stay calm, stay calm." But the command held no weight anymore. Her body shook not from cold, but from the raw edge of terror. The ferry groaned as it pressed deeper across the frozen water. The sound made her flinch. It was too much like the groan of ice under pressure, as though the lake might shatter and swallow them whole. She turned her gaze to the ferryman. He stood motionless at the helm, one hand gripping the frozen wheel, the other resting on the lantern's handle. The faint flame cast him in trembling orange, but his face remained as pale and immovable as the rest of the world. Her throat constricted. Against her will, she whispered, "Please, just tell me this is normal. Tell me they're just tired. Tell me I'll get across." The ferryman's head shifted, slow, deliberate. His pale eyes met hers across the deck. His voice, when it came, cracked like ice splitting. "We are waiting." Sarah swallowed hard. Her tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth, dry and frozen. Waiting for what? The ferryman's expression never changed. For someone with warmth. The words lodged deep inside her chest, and with them came understanding. Every gaze on the ferry fixed itself back on her. She felt it like hands pressing against her skin without touching, like mouths breathing against her neck without sound. Her warmth was the only thing that moved in this place, the only fire left in a world already claimed by ice, and they all wanted it. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps. She clutched her coat tighter, as if she could hold her heat in with her own hands. Her heart pounded against her ribs, each beat screaming against the encroaching cold. Her mind spiraled. If I stand, if I run to the railing, maybe I can jump, maybe I can make it to shore. But the thought collapsed under the image of the lake's black surface, frozen solid, stretching endlessly. Where could she go? Where could she run when the storm itself seemed to close behind her? Her only choice was to stay, to sit there while the dead stared. Her lips quivered. She whispered, almost silently to herself, "They can't take it. They can't. I won't let them." But even as she said it, she could feel her warmth slipping, and in the silence, she knew the ferry was carrying her not toward safety, but deeper into their waiting hunger. The ferry slowed. Sarah didn't notice it at first. The deck had always felt motionless, gliding without ripple or sound, but then came a subtle shift, a groan of wood, the rattle of chains, slackening. The lantern at the helm swayed wider, its flame thinning as though starving for air. They had stopped. Through the veil of snow, she saw only endless darkness stretching in every direction. No shore, no dock, nothing but ice and shadow. The storm had dulled to a hush, leaving the lake disturbingly still, as though the world itself had been stripped of movement. The ferryman turned. Until that moment, he had seemed a part of the boat, a figure fixed to the helm, more statue than man. Now his pale eyes shifted toward her, and Sarah felt them pierce through the crowd of silent passengers and land squarely on her. His voice cracked the silence like the splintering of ice under weight. "We are waiting." Her throat tightened. "W. Waiting for who?" The ferryman's lips barely moved. "For you." The air snapped colder. Sarah gasped, each breath slicing her lungs as if filled with knives. She staggered to her feet, clutching the railing for balance, her vision spinning. Around her, the passengers moved at last, not rising, not rushing, but turning. Slowly, all of them. Dozens of faces lifted in unison, pale and hollow, their eyes glazed with frost. The lantern light revealed skin stretched taut, lips split and bluish, hair stiff with ice. Snow still clung to their coats, though none of it melted. They had been here too long, far too long, their eyes fixed on her. Sarah's legs shook. "No." The word tumbled out, barely audible, but it was enough. The silence deepened, as though the lake itself leaned in to listen. The first hand reached for her. It was the man beside her, the one whose touch had already stolen a spark of her warmth. His gloved fingers lifted, stiff, trembling, not with weakness, but with hunger. When they brushed her wrist, the shock of cold was so violent she cried out. It wasn't like touching ice. It was like touching vacuum, as though her heat was being sucked out, pulled mercilessly into something that had nothing of its own. Sarah yanked her arm back, clutching it against her chest. But another hand rose, then another, all moving with the same dreadful slowness, as though choreographed. Every passenger leaned toward her now, their arms reaching, their lips parting. She stumbled backward, her shoulder colliding with the railing. Her breath erupted in panicked clouds. The ferry didn't move. The lake didn't move. Only the dead did. She screamed at the ferryman, voice ragged, "Turn it back. Take me back." But the old man only watched, eyes as still as frozen water. "It cannot turn back. Not without what we came for." Sarah shook her head wildly. I'm not yours. I'm alive. Do you hear me? I'm alive." The ferryman tilted his head, beard glittering with frost. "That is why you are here." The first hand closed around her arm. She shrieked, twisting, but the grip was iron, far stronger than its brittle appearance. The cold surged through her sleeve, stabbing deep into muscle, into bone. It wasn't just freezing her, it was draining her. She felt her strength falter instantly, knees buckling beneath her. Another hand clamped onto her shoulder. Another brushed her face, fingertips like shards of ice dragging across her cheek. Everywhere they touched, warmth bled out of her, leaving her flesh dull, numb, gray. Her body convulsed. She kicked, thrashed, flailed against them, but her blows struck only the stiff resistance of bodies that didn't need breath, didn't need blood. They did not flinch. They did not falter. They only reached, endlessly, hungrily, Her scream tore into the frozen night, echoing across the still expanse of the lake. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw something flicker at the edge of vision herself, lying still among them, pale and unmoving, her warmth already gone. The image made her gag, bile rising in her throat. "No," she rasped, thrashing harder, though her limbs felt weaker with every second. "You can't have me." But the hands only tightened, and the cold only deepened. The lantern at the helm flickered violently, its flame nearly smothered. In its weak glow, the ferryman's face looked hollow, eyes sunken, beard crusted with centuries of frost. His lips curled into what might have been pity, or hunger, or both. "One of us," he whispered. Soon, the hands multiplied. At first, Sarah thought only one or two reached for her. But as her eyes blurred and her body weakened, she realized they all were dozens of them, rising together, stretching pale and rigid, pressing against her from every side. Their touch was not chaotic, but purposeful, a ritual repeated countless times. Each hand took only a little, but together they drained her as swiftly as water seeping into cracked earth. Her breath burst out in ragged clouds, each smaller than the last. She tried to clutch her coat tighter, but her arms refused to obey. Her muscles had grown heavy, her joints stiff, as though her own body was betraying her. The cold wasn't just outside anymore. It had threaded its way inside her. She could feel it crawling up her spine, curling into her ribs, sinking into the hollow beneath her heart. It didn't stab or sting, it dulled, numbed, soothed almost, like a drug coaxing her into stillness. A terrible thought slipped across her mind. Maybe they're right. Maybe giving in would feel peaceful. The ferryman stepped closer, his boots silent against the deck. The passengers parted for him with reverence, though their hands never left her body. He loomed above her, pale eyes reflecting the lantern's frail flame. "The living always fight," he murmured, his voice brittle as breaking ice. "But fighting is only another way of offering what is already ours." His words slid through her like a knife. She wanted to scream back, to tell him he was wrong, that she was hers and no one else's. But when she opened her mouth, only a shallow exhale escaped a puff of warmth. The ferryman's gaze followed hungrily as it faded into the night air. The woman across from Sarah leaned closer, her face gaunt and rimed with frost. She pressed a hand against Sarah's chest, directly above her heart. Sarah convulsed. The touch burned, not with fire, but with an absence of it, an emptiness so profound it made her gasp. She felt her heartbeat falter, skipping a rhythm before slamming weakly back into motion. Her vision dimmed at the edges. The lantern above seemed farther away, its light fading. "This is it," she thought. "This is how it ends. Not screaming, not running, just being emptied until there's nothing left." But beneath the numbness, a fragment of herself flared. It was not courage. It was not strength. It was memory, a sudden image of warmth. The kettle whistling in her apartment, steam curling into the air, the scratchy blanket that smelled faintly of lavender, the feeling of laughter shared with her mother years ago, in front of a fire during another snowstorm. She clung to it desperately. "That's mine. That's still mine." Her lips trembled. She forced sound past them. "I am not yours." The ferryman's eyes narrowed. For the first time, his calm cracked. The flame in the lantern sputtered violently, shadows leaping across the deck. The whisper swelled, not just from him, but from every mouth around her, layered and overlapping, a choir of frostbitten throats. "One of us, one of us, one of us." Sarah thrashed, though her limbs felt foreign, uncooperative. She clawed weakly at the hands pressing into her. She kicked against the frozen planks. Her movements were small, pitiful, but they were hers. Each shuddering gasp she drew tore a fragment of warmth back into her body. Her scream built from deep in her chest, strangled and raw. "No!" The sound tore into the frozen night, carried across the black expanse of the lake. The hands recoiled only slightly, but enough for her to feel space open around her. The ferryman's expression darkened, his eyes glowing faintly with something ancient and cold. He leaned close, so near she could see frost forming along his beard as he whispered into her ear, "You can fight, girl, but the lake never forgets. It will take what belongs to it, sooner or later." The passengers surged again, pressing in tighter, their voices swelling until the air itself seemed to chant. Sooner or later, Sarah writhed against them, but the cold surged stronger, a final wave rushing through her veins, pulling her under. Her body arched once, her scream breaking into a ragged gasp, and then everything shattered. The sound of shattering still rang in her ears when Sarah's eyes snapped open. She was no longer on the ferry. The deck of dark, groaning wood was gone. The ferrymen, the pale passengers, the lanterns swinging in the storm all vanished. She lay on her side in a small lifeboat, its hull caked with frost. The wind howled around her, carrying shards of snow that stung her cheeks. The world was white and endless, the lake sealed beneath slabs of ice that stretched as far as her eyes could see. Her breath came in ragged bursts, each exhale clouding the air. She lifted her head weakly and saw them. Bodies, dozens of them, frozen stiff, sprawled in twisted shapes across the bottom of the boat and draped over its edges. Their eyes glazed, lips split with frost, fingers curled as if reaching for something they had never found. The sight made her stomach lurch. She clutched the side of the boat, trying to force herself upright, but her limbs resisted. Her strength was there, but thinner, weaker, as though some vital part of her had been siphoned away. Her mind reeled. She touched her own face with trembling fingers, half expecting her skin to crumble under her touch like brittle ice. But it held. She was alive. Somehow, impossibly, she was alive. She whispered to the storm, "I'm not one of you. I'm not." The words vanished into the wind, but her body told her otherwise. The cold clung too tightly now. Not the way it clings to a coat, but the way it settles into marrow. She could feel it in her chest, where warmth used to rise easily, now sluggish, dulled. When she pressed her palm over her heart, the beat was there but faint, as though smothered by a heavy blanket of frost. The boat rocked slightly, a faint groan of ice shifting beneath. She dared a glance over the side. The surface was glassy, black beneath the snow. In it, her reflection trembled, her eyes rimmed with frost, her lips pale, her breath clouding like the ghosts she had seen on the ferry. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw another face beneath her own. Hollow eyes, a mouth whispering without sound, lips forming the words she already knew. "One of us." She jerked back, heart pounding, though even that surge felt weaker than it should. Hours passed. The storm thinned, revealing fragments of gray sky. Sarah huddled among the bodies, too weak to move, too afraid to close her eyes. She knew that if she did, if she gave the cold even a moment's opening, it would take the rest of her. And yet, as exhaustion dragged her lower, she couldn't deny the truth pressing in from all sides. Something had already been taken. She was alive, but not whole. A piece of her warmth, the piece that made her human, was gone, claimed by the frozen ferry that had carried her across the lake. When rescuers found the lifeboat days later, they would marvel that one girl had survived the blizzard when all others had frozen. They would wrap her in blankets, press hot tea into her hands, and call it a miracle. But Sarah would never truly feel warm again. Story 3. The Tracks. The sound of steel had its own rhythm. Ben had learned that in his first month, working the night shift at the rail crossing, the rails were never truly silent. Even when no train was scheduled, they seemed to hum faintly, a vibration carried deep through the ground, as though remembering every wheel that had ever passed over them. If you pressed your ear to the iron, you could hear it, a low, endless moan, like the voice of the earth complaining about its burden. Most nights, that sound kept him company. The crossing was remote, a forgotten point along a line that had once been busy but now saw fewer trains each year. His cabin was little more than a shack of wood and corrugated steel, perched beside the tracks with a lantern hanging out front. On clear nights he could see the horizon stretch forever, rails glinting faintly in the moonlight until they disappeared into dark hills. On stormy nights, the fog and rain swallowed everything, leaving only the creak of the gate and the sigh of wind in the telegraph wires. He told himself he didn't mind the solitude. At 24, Ben was used to long shifts and longer silences, but sometimes, in the deepest hours of the night, the hum of the tracks felt less like company and more like a warning. There was an old story tied to this stretch of rail. Every railway man he had met knew some version of it, whispered between smoke breaks. Years ago, before his time, a woman and her daughter had been caught on the line. Their cart had broken down as a train barreled around the bend. No one could reach them in time. The story always ended the same way, the woman shielding the girl in her arms, both struck together. Some said the railmen had buried them by the embankment. Others said their bodies had never been found. The only proof, people claimed, was a scrap of fabric sometimes glimpsed snagged in the bolts of the track, or a faint impression of small footprints left in fresh snow, even when no one had passed. Ben didn't put stock in it. Ghost stories clung to every lonely place. But on nights when the fog rolled thick across the rails and the silence grew too heavy, he felt the weight of the tale pressing at the edges of his mind. That night, the fog came early. By dusk, the horizon had disappeared, swallowed by a heavy gray that thickened as darkness settled. The lantern outside the cabin glowed like a weak ember, barely cutting through the haze. Ben pulled on his coat, checked his watch, and began his inspection. He walked the line slowly, boots crunching on gravel, flashlight beam bouncing across the rails. The fog muffled every sound, making the world feel smaller, as though he were walking inside a tunnel made of mist. The rails gleamed faintly, their cold surface slick with condensation. He paused halfway down the stretch and crouched, running his hand over the steel. Warm, not from the air, the fog was damp and chilling, but from something deep within. He told himself it was natural, a remnant of a freight that had passed earlier, the heat of friction lingering in the metal. But the last train had been hours ago. Ben stood, shaking off the thought. He had work to do. The crossing was due for maintenance, and he had a checklist to follow. Check the gate's hinge, the warning bell, the power to the signal lights. Routine work, the kind that required more patience than skill. He ticked off each box in his notebook, glad for the distraction, but the hum beneath the rails grew louder. He felt it in his boots first, a vibration crawling up through the gravel. He checked his watch again. No train was scheduled until morning. He frowned, bending to press his palm flat against the track. The hum thrummed through his skin, strong, steady, and beneath it something else, a softer rhythm, irregular, almost like footsteps. Ben straightened quickly, heart thumping. He swept the flashlight beam across the fog. The light bounced back uselessly, illuminating only swirling gray. His breath came faster, misting in the damp air. "You're just tired," he muttered, forcing a laugh that sounded too loud. Tracks play tricks. Everyone says that. But as he turned to head back toward the cabin, he caught at a shape in the fog. Small, upright, standing between the rails. His body froze. The beam of his flashlight cut through the mist, landing on her. A girl, no more than 7 or 8, hair falling in limp strands around a pale face. She stood barefoot on the cold steel, her nightdress thin and soaked through with fog. Ben's chest constricted. He shouted instinctively, "Hey, get off the track." The girl didn't move. Slowly, she turned her head. Her eyes caught the light, glassy and hollow, reflecting nothing back. The girl's eyes glowed faintly in the beam of Ben's flashlight, glassy and lifeless, reflecting nothing back. She stood so still that for a moment he thought she might be carved from the fog itself. Ben's throat tightened. He raised his voice again, louder this time. "Get off the track, it's not safe." His shout vanished into the mist, swallowed before it could echo. The girl didn't move. Her bare feet clung to the cold steel as if rooted there. Ben took a cautious step forward. His boots crunched on the gravel. "Come on, sweetheart. Off the track now." His voice was gentler, but the urgency cracked through it. There could be a train, and then he heard it. At first, only a faint vibration beneath his boots, then a low, distant rumble. The hum of the rails deepened, steadier, stronger, a sound he knew too well. The train was coming. Panic surged hot through his chest. He swung his flashlight toward the line, but the fog gave nothing back. No headlamp, no shape. Only the sound metal grinding against distance, a low thunder rolling closer. He turned back to the girl. She moved, not away from the rails, not toward him. She ran forward, down the track, her limbs jerking, her bare feet slapping against the iron. Her movements were wild, uncoordinated, as if she wasn't running of her own will but being pushed, shoved, driven ahead by something unseen. "Wait," Ben shouted, breaking into a run. "Get off the track." The fog tore around him as he sprinted, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly. The hum of the rails climbed higher, sharper, vibrating through his legs, rattling in his teeth. The train was closer now, too close. The girl's pale figure flickered in and out of the mist ahead of him, stumbling, veering. then slamming back onto the center of the tracks as if invisible hands shoved her. Ben's lungs burned. His boots slipped on the wet gravel, nearly sending him sprawling, but he forced his body forward. His breath came ragged, steaming in the cold. The train's horn blared suddenly, a mournful cry that cut through the fog and made his bones rattle. Lights flared faintly in the distance, hazy through the mist, but growing brighter. "Move!" he bellowed, desperation cracking his voice. "Please get off." The girl stumbled, falling to her knees on the steel. She turned her head slowly, mechanically, to look back at him. Her hollow eyes locked onto his, and she whispered something he couldn't hear. The ground trembled violently. The rail beneath her feet shivered, glowing faintly with heat. Ben's mind screamed at him to stop, to turn away, but his body carried him forward. He lunged, arms outstretched. The train roared closer, a wall of sound in the fog. He reached for her and felt something push back. It wasn't her. It wasn't resistance from a child's body. It was a force, immense and unseen, shoving him away from her, pressing against his chest with a strength that nearly knocked him off his feet. His muscles strained, his teeth clenched, every nerve screamed. The girl's head tilted as though listening to something he could not hear. Her lips moved again. This time, the whisper carried, faint but unmistakable. "Don't take me. She won't let you." Ben's stomach lurched. The force pressed harder, threatening to drive him back into the gravel. He fought against it, clawing toward the girl, every step a battle. The train's lights broke through the fog, a blazing sun bearing down the line. Horn shrieking. The girl screamed suddenly, not with fear, but with a high, broken wail that echoed like metal tearing apart. She scrambled forward, running again but not off the tracks, always along them, as if the steel itself had her in its grip. Ben forced another step, another. His breath tore his throat raw. "I won't let you," he roared, his voice nearly lost under the train's thunder. The invisible force surged, slamming against him, and for a moment he thought he would fail. And then he heard it, a woman's voice, whispering through the roar, curling out of the fog like smoke. "Leave her. She belongs with us." The woman's whisper slid into his ear like cold breath against bare skin. "Leave her. She belongs with us." "Oh." Ben's chest locked. His flashlight beam shook violently in his grip, jittering across the rails until it blinded him with its own glare against steel. He could barely see her, the small figure in the fog, stumbling, dragged by something he couldn't see, but he didn't need sight to feel the danger. The hum in the rails was deafening now, vibrating up through the gravel into his bones, into his teeth, making every nerve scream. The train was coming. The horn split the night, a raw mechanical howl that reverberated through the fog like the cry of some enormous animal. The sound rattled his lungs, made his knees buckle. His instincts told him to get away, to save himself. But the girl was still on the track. He ran. The fog clawed at him, wrapping his legs, trying to slow him. His boots slipped on the wet stones, each stride a desperate gamble. His flashlight beam flailed wildly, sometimes catching the girl's pale nightdress, sometimes bouncing back uselessly against the mist. His breath rasped in his throat, raw and wet. The rail beneath the girl glowed faintly with heat, trembling like a living thing. She collapsed to her knees, arms hanging limp, her head turning in eerie, deliberate slowness to face him. Her lips moved. Her voice carried barely above the roar. "She won't let me go." Ben lunged. He hit the ground hard, skidding on gravel, but managed to hook his arms around the girl's tiny frame. Her body was colder than stone, stiff and waterlogged, like pulling a corpse from a river. He grunted, trying to drag her free. That was when it hit him. The force. Invisible. Crushing. A wall of pressure slamming into his chest and shoulders, pinning him down. It wasn't like wrestling a person. It was like the air itself had hardened, grown teeth, and decided he wasn't allowed to move. His arms burned, his lungs seized, his vision spotted with black. "No!" he roared, but the sound was swallowed instantly, crushed beneath the oncoming thunder. The train's lights burst through the fog, two blazing suns widening with every heartbeat. The ground convulsed under the weight of the approaching machine. The horn screamed again, louder, closer, a sound so big it pushed tears from his eyes. The girl thrashed, not against him, but against herself, limbs jerking like a puppet tangled in its own strings. She wailed, a high, piercing cry that didn't sound human, more like metal tearing apart. Ben clutched her tighter. He tried to pull her free, but the pressure shoved back harder, bending his body toward the rails. His knees scraped raw on the wooden ties. His teeth ground together until he tasted blood. The voice returned, hissing sharp and clear through the chaos. "She is already mine." The girl's body jerked violently, yanked toward the train as if invisible chains had fastened around her. Ben felt her slipping through his grip, felt her small frame tearing away from him like water spilling through desperate fingers. He screamed into the fog, "I won't let you have her." The force slammed against him one last time. His ribs groaned, pain spiking white-hot through his chest. The lights filled his vision impossibly bright, erasing everything else. For an instant, the girl's face lit up clear. She wasn't hollow anymore. She wasn't lifeless. She was terrified. Her eyes brimmed with tears. Her lips shaped words he couldn't hear, but he knew them. "Help me." Ben summoned everything left in him. With a guttural roar, he heaved sideways, wrenching her from the invisible grip. His muscles tore. His lungs burned, but somehow she came loose. They tumbled together off the rail, slamming into the gravel shoulder. The train arrived. It was like a god tearing through the fog. The engine thundered past, a wall of steel blotting out the world. The horn screamed inches above his head, deafening. The air itself turned violent, a hurricane tearing grit from the ground and hurling it into his face. The shockwave flattened him, pressed him into the gravel, rattled his bones like dice in a cup. The ground shuddered with each wheel that hammered the track. The rails screamed, sparks flying from unseen brakes. The noise was too vast to comprehend, so loud it became a solid thing, crushing every thought until there was nothing but vibration and pain. He buried his face against the girl's body, shielding her with his own. The gravel bit into his skin. His ears rang until they gave up and left him in silence, though he could still feel the roar echoing inside his skull. For a moment, he was certain he had died. And then silence. The last carriage vanished into the fog, trailing sparks and echo. The rails sang for a moment longer, then quieted, leaving only the whisper of settling mist. Ben lifted his head, trembling, lungs dragging for air. He looked down at the girl in his arms, but it wasn't a girl anymore. It was a bundle of sodden cloth, limp and reeking. A doll, crudely stitched, its button eyes cracked and dull, its mouth a crooked seam of thread. Its body sagged in his arms, stuffed with damp straw that leaked out in clumps. Ben recoiled with a strangled cry, hurling it away. The doll landed on the gravel shoulder, its head tilted back at an unnatural angle, its button eyes gleaming faintly in the dying light. The fog shifted. On the opposite side of the track, a figure materialized, a woman, draped in tattered clothes, her face pale and sharp, her eyes hollow pits glowing faintly, her lips parted, mouthing words etched into the steel itself. Ben's beam caught the words, burned into the rust between the rails, letters blackened like a brand. "Together, forever. Do not try to part us." When his light flickered back, the woman was gone. Only the doll remained, its frayed smile staring up at him from the gravel. The rails were still singing when Ben stumbled back toward the cabin. It was a faint, metallic hum residue of the train that had just torn through the fog, but it lingered longer than it should have, vibrating in the marrow of his bones, echoing in his teeth. Each step he took on the gravel felt unstable, as though the ground beneath him pulsed with a heartbeat not his own. He kept glancing over his shoulder. The doll was gone from where it had fallen. The memory of its button eyes gleaming up at him made his skin crawl. He had hurled it aside, certain it would stay where it landed. But the fog had swallowed the spot, and when he dared look again, the gravel lay bare, empty, as though nothing had ever touched it. Only the words remained. Ben forced himself to shine his flashlight down at the track. The letters burned into the steel were still there, blackened and jagged, each word deep as if carved by heat that no flame could produce. "Together forever. Do not try to part us." His throat constricted. He tore his gaze away, snapping the beam off, but the words glowed faintly in his mind as though branded onto the inside of his eyelids. By the time he reached the cabin, his legs trembled so badly he nearly collapsed against the door frame. He pushed inside, slamming the door behind him, and dropped onto the wooden chair by the desk. The lantern on the desk flickered, its flame shrinking low. The small room, usually a comfort with its stale coffee smell and stacks of logbooks, felt like a trap now, walls too close, air too thin. Ben buried his face in his hands. His skin was slick with cold sweat despite the chill. He whispered to himself, a desperate mantra. It wasn't real. Just the fog. Just stories. Just stories. But when he lowered his hands, the window stared back at him. Outside, the fog pressed against the glass, and in its shifting folds, he thought he saw a face, a woman's, watching. He lurched to his feet, knocking the lantern sideways. The glass rattled, flame sputtering. He blinked hard, rubbed his eyes, but the fog beyond was just fog again, pale and restless. The logbook lay open on the desk, pen resting across the page. His last entry was neat, routine. Inspected gate hinge, all clear, signal lights functioning. His hand shook as he lifted the pen again. Slowly, he wrote, saw a girl on the tracks, tried to save her, became a doll. The words looked insane. He pressed harder, scribbling beneath them. Not real. Folk tricks. Fatigue. But when he set the pen down, the ink bled strangely across the page. The letters warped, curling into new shapes, until they spelled something else entirely. She is ours. Ben shoved the book away, heart hammering. No, he whispered. No, you don't get to follow me here. The lantern guttered low, shadows spilling up the walls. And then came the sound, a soft tapping against the glass. Once, twice, steady, like small fingers drumming against the window pane. Ben froze, his breath caught, his body rigid. He didn't dare turn, but his peripheral vision betrayed him. Something small leaned against the window, a pale shape, its head tilted. A doll, its button eyes gleamed faintly in the lantern's weak light. Its stitched mouth hung open in a frayed smile. Ben staggered back, knocking into the chair, his throat raw with a sound he couldn't release. The tapping resumed, faster now, desperate. He clutched the lantern in both hands, raising it like a weapon, though the flame was nearly out. His voice cracked. What do you want from me? The whisper came, curling through the wood of the cabin, through the glass, through his skin. You cannot part us. Never. The lantern died. Darkness poured over the room when the lantern went out. Ben froze, his own breath the only sound, harsh and uneven, echoing too loudly in the confined cabin. The window was gone, swallowed by fog and shadow, but he knew the doll was still there. He could feel its gaze pressing through the glass, heavier than any set of human eyes. He backed toward the desk, fumbling blindly until his hand struck the logbook. He clutched it as if paper and ink could shield him. You're not real, he whispered, his voice trembling. You're not real. But the tapping resumed, soft, deliberate, closer now, as if the glass was no longer between them. Each beat landed against his bones, sinking with the hum of the rails outside. Tap, tap, tap. He dared to look. The doll was inside. It sat on the floorboards, water dripping from its ragged cloth. Its button eyes gleamed faintly in the dark, catching some light that wasn't there. Its head tilted, mouth sewn in a crooked line that looked, in shadow, like a grin. Ben's throat locked. He stumbled backward, slamming against the cabin wall. His breath came in quick, ragged bursts, clouding in the freezing air. The logbook in his hand quivered. He looked down and saw the pages turning themselves. The pen scratched across the paper in sharp, jerking strokes. Words bloomed in black ink he hadn't written. You cannot part us. Together forever. The doll twitched. Its cloth hand lifted slowly, impossibly, and pressed against the floor. The tapping resumed, now from within the room, each beat sending shudders through the wooden planks. Ben snapped. He lunged for the lantern, shaking it until sparks flared and the wick caught weakly again. The flame sputtered, fragile, but it was enough to throw trembling light into the corners. The doll was gone. Only the logbook remained, lying open on the desk, its words still glistening wet as though freshly inked. Ben stared at it, his chest heaving, until a sound cut through the night. Not tapping this time. A whistle, long, mournful, too close. The cabin vibrated. The rails outside sang again, louder, deeper, until the whole world seemed to hum with the oncoming train. But there was no schedule, no train due. Ben staggered to the door, flung it open. The fog glowed faintly in the distance. Lights swelled, twin eyes cutting through the mist. The whistle wailed again, filling the valley with grief. And on the tracks, framed in that ghostly light, stood the woman. Her dress hung in tatters. Her hair clung to her face. Her eyes burned hollow and endless. She lifted one arm and pointed directly at him. Behind her, a smaller shape appeared. A girl, and in the girl's arms, the doll. Ben dropped the lantern. Glass shattered, flame dying instantly. Darkness surged back, heavier than before. The whistle screamed. Closer now. Impossibly close. The ground shook. The cabin walls rattled, dust falling from the rafters. He turned to run, and the logbook snapped shut in his hand. The last words written across its final page seared themselves into his eyes. He is ours. No one saw Ben again after that night. Weeks later, another worker would find the cabin abandoned, the lantern shattered, the logbook lying open on the desk, its last page smeared with ink, unreadable except for one line that had sunk deep into the paper, etched as though carved by a burning nail. Together forever. Do not try to part us. And though the cabin was empty, some swore they heard tapping on the window when they passed by, as if small fingers still drummed there, waiting. Story 4. The Attic. Emily had never liked mirrors at night. Even as a child, she avoided catching her reflection after the lights went out, as though she might see something looking back that wasn't quite her. Living alone in her 30s, she had trained herself to dismiss those instincts as leftover nerves. Just shadows, just imagination. But in the new house, the feeling returned. It wasn't the house itself, at least not at first. On paper, it was perfect. 2 stories, a small backyard, wood floors worn but still solid, and a price that made her friends envious. All that space for you alone? They asked. She laughed, agreed, promised dinner parties once she finished unpacking. Yet after the first week, Emily realized she hadn't once gone upstairs without glancing up past the second-floor landing, toward the narrow ceiling door that led to the attic. She never opened it. She told herself she was too busy, too tired, or simply uninterested. But the truth ran colder. The idea of that space unsettled her. At night, the sensation grew stronger. She would sit on the couch with a glass of wine, the TV humming low, and feel it, a weight pressing between her shoulder blades, a gaze. It had no source, no window aligned with her seat, no neighbors peering through the blinds, just the quiet of the house, broken only by the creak of old wood. Emily would turn sharply, certain she'd catch something in the corner of her eye. Nothing. The lamp burned steady, her reflection faint in the darkened screen. New house jitters, she muttered more than once, pouring herself another glass. But the jitters didn't fade. She began to hear things. The first time, it was faint, a scuff across the ceiling while she brushed her teeth. She froze, toothbrush hanging, and waited. Silence. Another night, curled in bed with her phone, she heard it again, 2 steps. Deliberate, weight shifting above. The sound traveled slowly, as though someone paced with careful patience. Her breath caught. She lay perfectly still, straining to hear. The house settled around her with the familiar groans of wood, but the footsteps were not settling. They were steps. By morning, she told herself it was pipes, or branches against the roof. Houses made noises. That was all. Still, she began locking her bedroom door. One evening, late, she turned off the TV and caught her reflection in the black glass. Behind her, in the dim halo of the lamp, something moved. A shape, faint and tall, hovering near the ceiling line. She spun in her seat, heart hammering. The room was empty, only the faint square outline of the attic door above. Her breath quickened. She rose, clutching the remote like a weapon, and stared at the ceiling. The air felt thick, heavy in her lungs. Slowly, she looked back at the TV. Her reflection stared wide-eyed, and there, high above her shoulder in the glass, was the faint outline of a face peering from a crack in the ceiling boards. Emily dropped the remote. The clatter echoed too loudly in the quiet. When she looked again, the reflection was empty. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she lay in bed, lights on, blanket pulled to her chin. Every creak in the house jolted her upright. Around 3 in the morning, She swore she heard the faintest shift above her ceiling, the sound of knees settling into wood, of weight distributing carefully. She stuffed her ears with her pillow, but the pressure of listening never left. By the end of her second week, Emily began avoiding the second floor entirely unless she had to sleep. The attic door seemed to loom larger each day, as though the ceiling pressed lower around it. She never touched the pull string, never even brushed beneath it, but each night, as she climbed the stairs, her eyes drifted up against her will, drawn to the seam of the hatch, half expecting to see it cracked open by a sliver. It never was. Still, she could not shake the image of that face in the reflection, watching, waiting, and she wondered, though she hated herself for it, if she had already been seen. By the third week, Emily no longer trusted her own house. She came home from work and moved quietly through the rooms, as though afraid of waking something. Each evening she turned on every lamp, chasing shadows from corners until the house glowed unnaturally bright. Yet the light didn't help. It only made the darkness above the ceiling feel heavier, as though it pressed down in retaliation. The noises returned, clearer now. At first it was just a scuff, a single creak of weight settling. Then it grew into patterns, footsteps pacing in short lines, dragging slowly from one end of the ceiling to the other. Sometimes she heard pauses, as if whoever or whatever was up there had stopped to listen. The silence after those pauses was worse than the sounds themselves. One night, as she sat in the living room, her phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced down for only a second. When she looked back up, the reflection in the darkened TV screen caught her breath. She wasn't alone. Behind her, just above her shoulder in the reflection, a pale shape leaned downward from the ceiling line. Its face was indistinct, features blurred as though pressed against glass, but its eyes, those eyes gleamed dark and hollow, fixed directly on her. Emily whipped around. The ceiling was blank, the attic door shut tight. She stumbled to the TV, heart pounding, and pressed the power button. The screen lit with static, then a sitcom laugh track. Too loud, too cheerful. She lowered the volume until only the faint hum filled the room. Her hands shook. She whispered to herself, "It's nothing. It's nothing. Just stress." But her reflection had not lied. Later that night, lying in bed, she heard them again. Footsteps, not random, not the restless groans of wood. These were steady, deliberate, tracing a path above her ceiling, back and forth, heel to toe, slow and patient. She pulled the blanket over her head, her body stiff with fear, her ears strained. The steps grew louder, sharper, as though whatever walked above her had decided to press harder with each pass. Her heart hammered. She tried to control her breathing, afraid the sound of it would be heard. Then, silence. Emily lay frozen, sweat slicking her palms despite the cold. The silence stretched long, brittle as glass. She almost convinced herself the noises had stopped, until something scraped, not footsteps this time. Something dragging slowly across the floorboards above, circling directly over her bed. Her pulse spiked so hard it hurt. She clutched the blanket tighter, pulling it to her chin. And then, a soft knock, 3 sharp raps, right above her headboard. She gasped, clapping a hand over her mouth. Her whole body shook. The knocking stopped. Silence spread again, thicker than before. Emily waited. Minutes dragged. Her eyes burned with unshed tears. At last, she slid from the bed, her legs trembling so badly she nearly collapsed. She grabbed her phone, its glow casting the room in blue light, and crept to the door. As she reached for the knob, another sound came different this time. From her closet, a faint, rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming against wood. Emily froze, phone trembling in her grip. She turned slowly toward the closet door. The tapping stopped. The room fell still, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something stood just beyond that thin sheet of wood, waiting. Her throat tightened. She whispered, almost pleading, "What do you want?" No answer, only silence. But the air in the room felt heavier, charged, as though the house itself held its breath. Emily locked her bedroom door that night, though she knew a lock was no defense against something she couldn't even see. It was the only gesture left, a talisman against the growing weight that pressed in from the ceiling. She sat on the bed in her sweatpants and hoodie, knees drawn to her chest, phone clutched in one hand like a lifeline. The house was silent, too silent. She checked the time. 11:47 p.m. Her chest tightened. She had begun to dread these hours, the stretch between midnight and 3, when the air felt thickest, when the noises always came. She tried scrolling on her phone, refreshing feeds she didn't care about, clinging to the glow, but her eyes kept flicking upward toward the seam of ceiling where the attic hatch lay. The wood creaked, a faint scuff, followed by another. Emily froze, thumb hovering above the screen. She turned off the phone's light, plunging the room into dimness, and listened. The sound came again. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, pacing directly above her. Her pulse pounded in her ears. The steps grew louder, not frantic, not hurried, but steady, as though the one above wanted her to hear, wanted her to count the distance with each creak of wood. 1, 2, 3. Pause. Then the sound of weight shifting, boards bending under pressure. Emily pressed her back against the wall, as if the plaster could shield her. Her breath came in shallow pulls. She wanted to scream, but terror pressed a hand over her mouth. The footsteps changed direction. They circled, passing from one corner of the ceiling to the other, always returning to hover above her bed. She imagined it, bare feet pressing down on wood, pacing in measured lines, pausing, listening. Her throat burned. She couldn't take it anymore. She dove under the blanket, curling into a ball, covering her head, as if cloth could mute the world. The sound grew sharper, closer, creak, creak, creak. Each step matched her heartbeat until she could no longer tell which belonged to her body and which to the thing above. Then silence. Emily held her breath. Minutes passed or seconds. She couldn't tell. Her body ached from the tension, every muscle clenched. And then came the knock. 3 sharp raps, directly above the headboard. Her body jerked. She nearly screamed, but clamped a hand over her mouth. The sound was deliberate, mocking. The silence returned, heavier than before. She lay still, listening, waiting. Nothing, until another noise broke through, not above, from the closet. At first it was faint, a subtle rhythm like fingers brushing lightly against wood. Then it grew louder, clearer, becoming a steady tapping. Tap, tap, tap. Emily's chest tightened. She peeked out from under the blanket, her eyes darting toward the closet door. The knob gleamed faintly in the lamplight, perfectly still. The tapping continued. Her mouth went dry. "No," she whispered, barely audible. "No, no, no." She slid off the bed, her legs shaking so violently she had to grip the mattress to steady herself. Each step toward the closet felt heavier, as though the air thickened around her. Her phone vibrated in her hand with a low battery warning. The glow dimmed, flickering. She stopped inches from the door. The tapping ceased. Silence pressed in. Emily lifted her hand slowly, reaching for the knob. Her skin prickled as though someone's breath hovered just beyond the wood. The knob twitched. She staggered back, colliding with the bed. Her phone slipped from her hand, clattering to the floor, its screen going black. Darkness swallowed the room. Her breaths came in shallow gasps. She scrambled for the phone, fingers searching blindly on the floorboards. She found it, thumb slamming against the button, until the faint glow returned. The closet door was open, just an inch, but she knew it had been closed. Her vision swam. She wanted to flee the room, but her legs wouldn't obey. Instead, she stood frozen, staring at the narrow gap. Something shifted inside, a scrape of wood, a sigh. She whispered, "Please." Her voice broke. The air grew colder, seeping into her bones. And then, impossibly, the noise returned. Not tapping, not footsteps, but the sound of pages turning. Slow, steady, as though someone were leafing through a book inside her closet. Emily forced herself to move. She reached for the knob, pushed the door open with trembling hands. The closet was dark, shelves lined with boxes, clothes hanging limp and forgotten. She lifted her phone higher, its weak glow cutting across the shadows. There, on the floor, lay a book. An old journal, leather cracked, pages yellowed. It sat open, a draft of cold air stirring the corners, turning them one by one. Her breath caught. She crouched, hesitating, then reached for it. The cover was brittle beneath her touch, flakes of leather breaking away. She lifted the book into the light. The handwriting sprawled unevenly, ink faded but legible. I hear them moving below me. I hear them breathe. They never look up, never notice. I can watch as long as I stay quiet. Emily's stomach clenched. She flipped to another page. I am safest here. They cannot see me if I do not show myself. But I see them. Every day I see them. Her hands shook, pages fluttering faster. The words grew frantic. I cannot leave. I mustn't. If I stay, I will always have company. They will not know I am here, but I will know them. The final page stopped her cold. The ink was darker, fresher somehow, as though written more recently. I have found a friend. She is here now. She does not know me yet, but she will. She cannot leave me. I am watching her, even now. Emily dropped the journal, stumbling backward. Her phone's light flickered, dimmed, then died, plunging her into complete dark. From above, the attic groaned. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, moving directly over her head. Her scream caught in her throat. She scrambled for the door, clawing at the handle, but froze when she heard it. A whisper, close, too close, from the dark above. I see you. The whisper slithered through the ceiling boards. So close it felt as if a mouth hovered inches above her ear. I see you. Emily clutched the doorknob, her knuckles bone white. Her legs trembled so violently she thought they might give way beneath her. She wanted to run, to hurl herself down the stairs and out of the house, but she couldn't move. The words had rooted her to the spot. Then the footsteps began again. Not the slow, measured pacing she'd heard before. These were faster, heavier, darting across the attic with unnatural speed. The ceiling groaned under the weight, each board crying out as though something sprinted in tight circles above. Emily gasped, stumbling backward into the room. The sound grew louder, closer, until it seemed to crash directly overhead. Dust rained from the beams, drifting onto her hair, her clothes. The running stopped. Silence fell like a dropped curtain. She pressed herself against the wall, chest heaving, eyes wide on the ceiling hatch. The thin wooden square loomed above, trembling faintly in its frame. For a terrible moment she thought it might burst open, something spilling out into her room. But it didn't. Instead, she heard breathing. Slow, deep, in and out, as though someone lay flat on their stomach on the attic floor, face pressed close to the cracks, exhaling directly into her world. Emily shook her head violently, whispering, "No, no, no." She grabbed the journal from the floor and flung it against the wall. It landed with a soft thud, flipping open to pages she couldn't see. Her phone was dead. No light, no comfort. The shadows thickened, gathering in the corners, pressing against her. The breathing above her grew louder, raspier, as though the air itself struggled to escape lungs that had not worked in years. She clapped her hands over her ears, tears spilling hot down her cheeks, but it made no difference. The sound lived inside her bones now. She staggered back toward the bed, collapsed onto it, and dragged the blanket over her head like a child. The fabric muffled her gasps, trapped heat against her skin, but the illusion of safety was all she had left. Underneath the blanket, she whispered prayers she hadn't said since childhood. The footsteps resumed. 1, 2, 3. Deliberate. They circled, slow again now, as though savoring the fear. Each creak of the wood above her was torture. She imagined him the man from the journal, crawling on hands and knees, dragging himself across the floorboards, head tilted sideways so one eye could peer through the cracks. Her stomach lurched. She pressed her face into the mattress, trying to block the thought, and then came a new sound. Not from above, from the closet. 3 knocks, hard and sharp. Emily's scream tore free at last, muffled under the blanket. She ripped it away, eyes darting to the closet door. It rattled on its hinges, the knob twitching as though gripped from within. Her whole body shook. She scrambled off the bed, pressing her back against the far wall, as far as she could get from both ceiling and closet. The knocking came again, louder, more urgent. Bang, bang, bang. Her throat was raw. She shouted, "What do you want from me?" The house answered. Above, the footsteps stopped. The breathing ceased. The attic fell silent, but the closet door continued to tremble, as though something inside had grown impatient. Emily's eyes darted to the journal where it lay open on the floor. The pages fluttered in a draft that came from nowhere. She forced herself to look. The ink on the last page shimmered faintly, black lines curling as though wet again. I have found a friend. She is here now. The words seemed to pulse, letters expanding and contracting like a heartbeat. Then, beneath them, a new line appeared, writing itself slowly, the pen invisible. She is in the room with me. Emily's breath hitched. Her skin broke out in cold sweat. She tore her gaze from the journal and fixed it on the closet door, which rattled harder now, shaking in its frame. The sound stopped. Total silence. Emily's ears strained, desperate, afraid. The quiet stretched, so absolute it screamed louder than any noise. And then, 3 soft knocks. Not on the ceiling, not on the closet door, from inside the closet itself. The 3 soft knocks echoed through the room, gentle as fingertips on glass, yet sharp enough to freeze Emily in place. Her chest heaved. She pressed herself tighter against the wall, eyes fixed on the closet door. Nothing moved now. No footsteps above, no breathing in the attic. Only the closet, waiting. She whispered to herself, "It's not real. It's not real." But the silence that followed answered her too well. The closet wanted her to move. Her legs carried her forward before her mind consented. Each step felt as though she waded through heavy water. Her breath came shallow, trembling. She reached the door. The knob was cold under her palm, colder than metal should ever be. For a long moment she stood frozen, forehead pressed to the wood, as if listening might offer answers. Silence. Then just behind the door came a sigh. Long, relieved, as if someone had been holding their breath all this time. Emily flinched. Her knees weakened, but before she could retreat, her hand twisted the knob on its own, driven by something deeper than will. The door swung open. Inside, the closet yawned black. Her phone was dead. The only light came from the hallway lamp, bleeding faintly through the crack beneath her bedroom door. It cut across the floor of the closet in a pale strip, revealing the journal where it had fallen earlier. The pages lay open, and the ink was moving. Emily's breath caught as she crouched, drawn forward like a moth. The letters sprawled across the last page, dark and glistening, curling as if written in that very moment. I am not alone anymore. Her hand shook as she reached for the book. She didn't want to touch it, but something compelled her. The paper was warm under her fingertips. Another line bled onto the page, the pen unseen. She has opened the door. Emily's throat tightened. She looked up. At first, she saw nothing, just the hanging clothes, their shadows like long arms reaching toward her. Then something shifted in the darkness at the back of the closet. A figure crouched low, knees bent at an impossible angle, head tilted sideways, pale skin stretched thin over bone. Hollow eyes gleamed faintly in the dark. Its mouth was open, lips cracked, teeth yellowed, but no sound emerged. It was not a ghost, not an echo. It was a man, or what was left of one. Emily stumbled back, slamming against the wall. Her scream tore through her throat, but the thing only crawled forward, joints cracking, limbs scraping against the wooden floor. Its voice came at last, raw and rasping, as if unused for years. "I see you." Her vision blurred with terror. She turned to flee, but the journal still clung to her hand. The page fluttered, forcing her eyes back down. The words had changed again. "She is my friend. She will stay with me." The door to the closet slammed shut behind her. Her scream was swallowed whole by the house. Weeks later, the realtor would show the property again. The bedroom looked untouched, the closet door slightly ajar. Inside, on the floor, lay a journal open to the last page. The ink was fresh, letters wet as though written that morning. "I have found a friend. She is here." Story 5. The empty chair. George kept 2 plates on the table. He always had. He always would. His neighbors thought it was sentimental, maybe even a little sad. His daughter, when she visited once a month, pursed her lips at the sight but never commented. She just helped with the groceries, asked about his blood pressure, and left early to catch her train back to the city. But George didn't keep the second plate for their sake. He kept it for himself, for her. The ritual steadied him. Each evening began the same. He'd shuffle to the cupboard, retrieve the plate with the fading floral pattern, the one she had insisted they never throw away. Not even after the glaze chipped near the rim. "It's still good," she used to say, "as long as it holds what we give it." Then he'd place it across from his seat, napkin folded neatly, silverware aligned. Sometimes, he found himself straightening the knife twice, making sure it caught the light just as she liked it. And then he would talk. His voice at first would falter in the silence. He wasn't used to speaking out loud anymore. Days passed without more than a polite thank you to the mailman. But once he started, the words tumbled easier, as though her listening ear still waited. He told her about the weather, about how the tomatoes in the garden were refusing to ripen, about the ache in his shoulder when he tried to reach the top shelf. Mundane details, unworthy of anyone else's attention. But with her, such details had always mattered. He remembered the way she used to rest her chin on her hand across the table, eyes shining, nodding at every word. She would hum sometimes, a little tune of acknowledgement, soft as a cat's purr. He imagined it still, filling the pause when his fork scraped against the plate, and he answered it too, chuckling softly as if she had just teased him. The house seemed to lean closer during those moments. The wallpaper's faded roses caught the lamplight, almost blooming again. The floorboards sighed as though shifting to listen. Even the clock on the wall, ticking steady, softened its rhythm to join the conversation. George felt the emptiness recede. He wasn't a man dining alone. He was part of something larger, something that had not entirely left. But the illusion never lasted long. The moment he finished his meal, the silence crept back. The second plate sat spotless, untouched. The chair across from him held nothing but air. His chest ached at the sight, a hollow throb that no medicine eased. He often lingered, refusing to clear the table right away, afraid that wiping the plate clean would erase her all over again. So he raised his glass. "To you," he whispered. "Always." He imagined her smile then, the one that softened the corners of her mouth, the one that made the world a place worth staying. For a flicker, the room felt less cold. But nights were longest after dinner. When he carried the dishes back to the sink, he sometimes thought he heard her behind him, the faint rustle of her dress, the shuffle of slippers. Once, he even smelled her perfume. Lilacs, his favorite, drifting faintly through the hall, though no flowers had been in bloom for months. He told himself it was memory, nothing more. Memory had weight, after all. It clung to objects, to spaces, to the human mind. Still, each time he set the empty chair in place, a small part of him wondered if perhaps it wasn't memory alone. Perhaps she lingered. Perhaps she was waiting. That evening, after the rain, the illusion came sharper. George had set the plates as always. He spoke of the storm, how the gutters overflowed, how the roof tiles held firm. He mentioned the ache in his knees, the way the postman seemed to avoid eye contact. His voice filled the room, bouncing off the walls with a warmth that almost fooled him. And when he raised his glass, he swore just faintly that the chair across from him creaked, as though weight had shifted into it. He froze, glass hovering in the air. The silence thickened, deep and watchful, but when he forced himself to look, the chair was still, empty. His hand trembled. He forced a smile. "Old ears," he muttered, finishing his drink. Yet when he gathered the dishes, he noticed something that unsettled him more than the sound. The napkin on the empty plate was slightly askew. George had always been careful not to look directly at the empty plate when he spoke. He feared that if he stared too long, he would see nothing at all, and the illusion would collapse. So he kept his eyes on his food, on the table, on the clock that ticked faithfully above the mantel. That night, however, something broke the habit. Halfway through his meal, as he recounted to his absent wife the details of his grocery trip, a sound interrupted him. A faint clink, metal against porcelain. George froze, fork halfway to his mouth. The room held its breath with him. He waited, ears straining. Silence. Only the clock ticked on. He chuckled weakly, shaking his head. Imagination. Old ears, that's all. He speared another bite and lifted it. Clink, this time clearer, as though a knife had scraped gently across the rim of the untouched plate. His throat went dry. He lowered his fork slowly, his eyes flicking toward the empty place across from him. The plate gleamed faintly under the lamp, untouched, perfect, and yet he had heard it. Maybe the house settling, he muttered, though the excuse rang hollow even in his ears. He forced another bite into his mouth, chewed mechanically, tried to keep talking. He spoke of the rain gutters, of the tomatoes stubborn in their vines. His voice trembled, cracking mid-sentence. Then it came again. Clink, clink, a soft rhythm, like the steady tapping of utensils against china. George's fork slipped from his hand, clattering against his plate. The sound echoed too loudly in the small room, but it was swallowed almost instantly by the quieter, more intimate clinking that followed, as though someone else had continued the meal in silence. His heart thudded in his chest. He dared not look up, but he couldn't stop listening. The sounds were distinct now. The slide of a fork across porcelain, the faint scrape of knife against plate, even the whisper of cloth, like a sleeve brushing the edge of the table. George pressed a trembling hand to his lips. His eyes watered, not from fear alone, but from something more dangerous hope. He whispered, voice breaking, "Mary?" The sounds paused. The silence returned, heavy and absolute. George swallowed hard, tears burning his eyes. "Mary, is it you?" For a long moment, nothing. Then came the faintest motion. The plate across from him shifted, not much, just a nudge, as though the table had tilted. But the table was solid, unmoving. His breath hitched. The napkin slipped off the plate, fluttering softly to the floor. George's heart pounded in his throat. His hands gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles whitened. He leaned forward, barely daring to breathe. The plate trembled again, sharper this time. A slow, deliberate tilt, rocking back and forth as though a hand unseen had touched it. The silverware chimed faintly, vibrating against porcelain. George's lips moved soundlessly. His whole body quivered. Part of him wanted to bolt from the room, to leave the table forever. But a deeper, more desperate part begged to stay, because if this was real, if this was truly her, then he wasn't alone. He whispered again, pleading, "Mary, thank you for coming back." The chair across from him creaked, just once, as though weight had finally settled into it. George's hand hovered above the table, knuckles pale, fork trembling between his fingers. The chair across from him had groaned, wood bending under a weight it should not bear. He should have fled, right then pushed himself up and staggered out into the wet night. But he didn't. He lifted his gaze. The air thickened, as though the lamplight itself strained to cut through it. Shadows swelled, pooling around the chair, spilling over the edges of the table like ink in water. The plate trembled, silverware rattling faintly against its surface. Slowly, deliberately, the fork shifted. It scraped across the porcelain with a sound that sent ice down George's spine. Clink, scrape, pause, clink, scrape, like someone savoring a meal. George's throat tightened. He whispered, "Mary?" The name cracked in the air like breaking glass. The shape in the chair did not look up. Instead, it bent forward, shoulders rounding, arms moving faintly as if cutting food only it could see. The silverware obeyed, jerking across the plate in awkward motions, grating against the porcelain. And then came something worse. Breathing, low, wet, labored. A rasp that rose and fell with each invisible mouthful. The sound made George's stomach turn. It was too loud for the small room, too close, as if the air itself carried it into his chest. He gripped the edge of the table with both hands to keep from collapsing. For a moment, though, his heart betrayed him. A warmth flickered inside his chest, fragile and dangerous. What if it really was her? What if death had not taken everything? What if she was here, with him, sharing the meal as she had for nearly 5 decades? He wanted to believe. Tears welled in his eyes. He whispered again, desperate this time, "Mary, if that's you, please, please, look at me." The figure stilled. The silverware dropped onto the plate with a dull chime. Slowly, with unbearable slowness, the shadow lifted its head. At first, it was nothing but a blur of smoke, but as it straightened, the darkness hardened into something more deliberate. The suggestion of a face formed, yet it was wrong. Too long, too hollow. The eye sockets were pits that drank the lamplight whole. And still, George felt them fixed on him, heavy and merciless. He gasped, recoiling, his chair scraping backward. The breath tore from his lungs, but his voice failed. His heart pounded, traitorous, caught between grief and terror. The shadow leaned forward slightly, and when it spoke, the words rattled like stones dragged over metal. "Thank you, George. This is very good." The air turned foul. A damp, earthy stench filled the room, like soil overturned after years of rot. George gagged, covering his mouth with a trembling hand. He shook his head violently. "No, no, you're not her. You can't be. The thing tilted its head, almost curious. The hollow pits of its eyes seemed to widen, pulling at him. Its voice slithered again. You called for me. George pressed back against the table, trying to stand, but his knees buckled beneath him. His fork slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor. The shadow did not flinch. It only leaned closer, shoulders twitching unnaturally, as if straining against the fabric of the chair. The plate wobbled once more, then spun, rattling until it flattened with a sharp, ringing crack. George flinched at the sound. When he looked back up, the shadow's featureless face loomed closer than before, its empty sockets locked to his. For the first time in years, George screamed. The dining room was shrinking. George knew it couldn't be real. Walls did not move. Ceilings did not lean closer, but the room seemed to curl inward all the same. Each tick of the wall clock pressed louder, heavier, as if time itself added bricks to the cage around him. His chair scraped backward. He thought he'd gained distance, but the table's edge still dug into his stomach. The lamp overhead flickered weakly, its light stretching unnaturally long shadows across the tablecloth. Those shadows did not behave. They twitched, jerked, reached, and always, they pointed back to the empty chair, except it wasn't empty anymore. The shadow sitting there pulsed like a heart, sometimes tall, sometimes hunched. Its outline flickered as though it was trying on different shapes, shoulders too broad, arms too thin, a head cocked at angles no living neck could manage. Each time the lamp flared, it looked different. Each time the lamp dimmed, it leaned closer. George could feel it in his lungs now. Every breath he drew came shallow, dragged through air that no longer belonged to him. It was thick, humid, tainted with a smell like wet earth turned sour. His chest rattled when he coughed, the sound swallowed quickly by the fork still scraping against porcelain. Clink, clink, clink. Not steady anymore. Frantic, mocking. The cracked plate quivered. A jagged line split through the floral pattern his wife had once chosen with care. George's eyes blurred with tears. That plate was hers. She had used it every Sunday, laughing about how old things still have life. Now it rattled beneath unseen hands, shuddering as if it wanted to break apart in front of him. Stop, George whispered. His lips trembled, his voice hoarse. Please, stop. The scraping ceased. For a breathless moment, the room was still. Then the knife lifted, slowly, deliberately. It hovered above the plate, catching the lamp's glow, before slamming down hard enough to split the porcelain clean in two. The sound cracked like a gunshot. George flinched, his heart leaping painfully against his ribs. The two halves of the plate rocked, clattering against each other like teeth chattering. From across the table, the shadow leaned forward. Its voice slithered, low and intimate. Stay, sit, eat with me. The words cut straight into George's chest. His legs wavered, threatening to fold. He stumbled backward, his spine colliding with the wall. The wallpaper was damp, clammy under his palms, as though it too had come alive. The chair opposite groaned, wood splintering. The shadow within it shifted, as if settling deeper into the seat. The air around it pulsed. George swore he could hear the faint beat of a second heart, not his own. Then came the laughter. Not loud, not wild, but soft, deliberate, a chuckle. At first it was his wife's, Mary's laugh, low and melodic, the sound that had filled this room for nearly half a century. But it bent. The sound warped, catching on sharp edges, breaking into static. It grew wet, guttural, wrong. The laugh dragged across the walls like claws on plaster until it became unrecognizable. No longer hers, but a grotesque parody of her joy. George pressed his hands over his ears. His knees buckled, and he slid down the wall until he crouched on the floor. Not you, he wept. You're not her. You're not her. The laughter stopped instantly. Silence pounded in his skull, and then closer than before, crawling into the marrow of his bones, came the whisper, "But I can be." The whisper clung to the air, fragile and poisonous. "But I can be." George sat trembling against the wall, knees drawn to his chest, the cross slipping from his fingers. His breaths came shallow, uneven, misting in the chill that now saturated the room. The house no longer felt like his own. It felt like a mouth, closing around him. Across the table, the shadow leaned closer, elbows invisible but heavy on the wood. The chair groaned as though straining to contain it. The broken plate quivered, its halves trembling in rhythm with the voice. "You don't have to eat alone anymore." George shook his head, tears streaking his face. "You're not her. You'll never be her." The socket seemed to deepen, a darkness within darkness. The laugh returned, softer this time, curving upward almost tenderly. "I don't need to be her. I only need to stay." The fork lifted again, scraping across the ruined plate with a sound like teeth grinding. The shadow twitched, its head tilting at a familiar angle, an angle Mary once held when teasing him, when listening to his long stories with patient amusement. George's heart clenched. For an instant, he wanted it. He wanted to believe, to close his eyes and surrender to the fantasy, to the comfort of a presence across the table. Because what was left of him, if not this? The room swelled with silence. Even the clock on the wall had stopped, its pendulum frozen mid-swing. The only sound came from George himself, his shallow sobs, the rattle of his chest, the faint wheeze of a heart, long tired of beating alone. The shadow whispered again, softer now, coaxing. "Tell me about your day, George. Tell me everything. I'll listen. I always will." His lips trembled. He wanted to resist, but the words spilled out anyway, cracked and broken. I fixed the shed." The rain came through again. I thought you'd laugh at me, struggling with the hammer." The shadow nodded slowly, as if listening. "Yes, that's good. Keep going." The air pressed heavier. The lamplight dimmed until only the table remained visible, the plates, the cutlery, the shadow leaning forward in its seat. Everything else in the house dissolved into haze. George spoke on, voice faltering between sobs. He told her about the dog next door, the neighbor's music, the tomatoes that refused to ripen, mundane fragments of a life too empty to stand on its own. And with every word, the shadow grew clearer. Its outline hardened, its head bent lower in imitation of her patience. For a moment, it almost looked human. For a moment, he almost let himself believe. But then came the sound, a chuckle. "Not hers. Never hers." It began low, vibrating the table legs, then rose sharp and thin, cracking into jagged bursts that skittered across the walls. The sound cut into George's heart like glass. He broke then. He slammed his fists against the table, voice hoarse and wild. "Leave me alone." The laughter only grew. And then quiet. The shadow straightened, its form towering now, its hollow gaze drowning the room in black. The broken plate slid toward George, stopping inches from his hands. The voice slithered one last time. "You set the place for me, George. You wanted company, and now you'll never dine alone again." The house fell silent after that night. When his daughter visited weeks later, she found the table set for two. The floral plate was whole again, spotless, gleaming under the lamp as though new. But the chair across from George's was pulled out slightly, as if someone had just risen from it. And in the silence of that house, she swore she heard it faint, delicate, the sound of cutlery clinking against porcelain, and a laugh, soft and wrong, echoing from the empty chair. Lucas had always said that photographs were ghosts, not of people, not exactly, but of moments. A ghost of laughter frozen mid-breath, a ghost of a hand reaching, never to touch again. He believed every image was a haunting, and he sought them out in ruins because no one else would. That was why the burned house called to him. Ashgrove Lane had been silent for 10 years, the fire long forgotten. But as he walked through its brittle skeleton rafters, sagging like tired bones, windows hollowed into empty sockets, he felt the silence press against his ribs. And then he saw it, the camera, scorched but intact, waiting like an artifact. When he lifted it, ash sifted from its seams, yet the weight inside was undeniable. "Film." He smiled despite the chill creeping down his spine. "You're still holding on," he whispered. In his apartment, the dark room welcomed him like a chapel. 4 walls painted black, shelves stacked with trays and bottles, the red bulb humming overhead. The air was heavy with fixer and developer, metallic and acrid, a smell he loved in spite of its sting. He opened the old camera with reverence, as if cracking open a coffin. The film inside was brittle, edges curled, but still wound tight on the spool. He worked carefully, guiding it through the chemicals, submerging it, agitating the tray with slow, practiced motions. Time stretched in the red light. His heart beat in rhythm with the drip of liquid, the swish of fluid against plastic, and then the images began to emerge. At first, faint outlines, a child's hand, the suggestion of curtains behind glass, then sharper, a woman's smile, radiant beneath the harsh chemistry, a man's hand resting on her shoulder. Lucas leaned closer, breath fogging the photo. A family, 2 parents, 2 children. One frame after another revealed them, birthday candles glowing, ribbons unraveling, arms around one another. The details stung with life. The children's gap-toothed grins, the father's tired but content eyes, the mother's hair pulled back in a hurried knot. Lucas felt his throat tighten. These were ghosts, yes, but gentle ones. Beautiful, he murmured. So damn beautiful. He clipped each photograph to the drying line, the paper dripping silver tears onto the floor. Then came the last frame. At first it looked the same. The 4 of them together, posed carefully on a couch, the lens set on a timer. Their bodies leaned inward, hands clasped, posture proud with domestic joy. But where their faces should have been, black, not blur, not overexposure, black, seared into the paper like coal pressed deep into the emulsion. Each head was a void, edges sharp, as if fire had burned away only what mattered. Lucas staggered back, his stomach clenched. The photograph swung gently on the clip, faces voided, bodies intact, hands still joined in impossible cheer. He wanted to dismiss it, to call it fire damage, chemical ruin, but it didn't look like accident. It looked deliberate, precise. He whispered into the red light, "What happened to you?" The photograph gave no answer, only dripped once, onto the floor. That night, he left the photo hanging. He couldn't bear to file it away. It seemed wrong to tuck it into a box with others, so he left it there, swinging faintly whenever he opened the darkroom door. The black voids always turned toward him. He dreamed poorly. In his sleep, he thought he heard shutter clicks, slow, patient, from the corner of his room. By morning, his head was heavy. He shuffled into the dark room, eyes gritty with lack of rest. The photographs hung still, paper dry and curled. He reached for the last one, bracing himself for the voids. But what he saw made his knees weaken. The faces were still black, yes. Those smears of void remained fixed, like burns. But the bodies gone. Where once they had sat together on the couch, arms entwined, now only the furniture remained. A couch, a stretch of wallpaper behind it, charred faintly at the edges. The family was gone, erased overnight. Lucas dropped the photograph back onto the line, heart pounding, and though the image was silent, the room felt heavier, as though the missing figures now stood somewhere just beyond his sight. Lucas tried to ignore it. He told himself that he had simply misremembered, that maybe he had been too tired, that the image had never shown the family clearly to begin with. But the certainty of it gnawed at him. He knew what he'd seen, and he knew something had changed. The photograph wasn't just a ghost, it was alive. The camera sat on his desk like a relic, blackened edges glinting dully in the lamplight. Lucas should have locked it away, sold it, thrown it into the river, but he couldn't. Instead, late one evening, he loaded it with a fresh roll of film. His hands trembled as he threaded it through, as though the old metal might bite. The shutter gave a dry click when he tested it. It still worked. His chest tightened. A laugh escaped him, thin and nervous. "All right, let's see what you can do." He started with the apartment. The first frame, the cluttered dark room, trays lined with chemicals, the red light dangling like a heart overhead. The second, his living room, all peeling paint and crooked blinds. The third, the mirror above his bathroom sink, fogged faintly from his shower. Each time, the camera shuddered in his grip, heavier than it should have been, as if it absorbed more than light. That night, he developed them. The first print emerged slowly in the tray. He leaned over, eyes narrowing. His darkroom, just as he'd shot it except for a streak in the corner, a blur of black smudging down the wall. He frowned, pulling it closer. At first, it looked like damage to the negative, but no, the shape was too deliberate. It curved like a shoulder, tapered like a neck, someone standing just inside the frame. He clipped it to dry and forced himself to keep going. The second print, his living room, crooked blinds, cracked couch, and behind the couch, between two slats of broken light, a face, or what remained of one. Not features, not detail, only the suggestion of skin blistered and burned, blackened hollows where eyes should be. The longer Lucas stared, the more certain he became that it wasn't just random distortion. It was looking at him. His mouth went dry. He forced his hand steady as he pulled the third print from its tray. His bathroom mirror. The reflection was normal, his sink, his towel hanging limp, the toothbrush glass cloudy with age. But in the mirror, just behind where he would have stood, another figure loomed, charred, smoke curling faintly from its outline. Its head tilted, burned mouth open as though mid-breath. Lucas staggered back, the photograph slipping from his wet fingers. It fell to the floor, chemical streaks running like blood across its surface. For a long time he stood there, chest heaving, eyes locked on the prints swaying from their clips. 3 frames, 3 intrusions. They weren't accidents. They weren't damage. They were them, the family from the ruined house, or what was left of them. The apartment grew cold around him, heavy with silence. He reached instinctively for the camera on the desk. Its metal body was warm, too warm, and as he touched it, he swore faintly. Beneath the hum of his lamp, he heard a voice. "One more picture, Lucas." He jerked his hand away, nearly toppling the chair. His pulse hammered. His breath came ragged, but his eyes wouldn't leave the camera. It was waiting. Lucas told himself he wouldn't. He sat at his desk for hours, staring at the camera resting on the wood. Its scorched frame seemed to pulse in the dim light, daring him. He had already seen too much shapes in the corner of his darkroom. A burned face leering through his blinds, the reflection that wasn't his own. He knew the next step was madness, and yet his hands moved anyway. He set the camera on a tripod, adjusted the focus toward his chair. The metal creaked faintly as he wound the mechanism. As though resisting him, Lucas sat, trying to breathe evenly. The lens glared back at him, a black pupil fixed on his heart. "Just one," he whispered. His voice cracked in the silence. "Just one. Then I'll know." He pressed the shutter. Click. The sound was sharper than before, like a door slamming shut. In the dark room, under the glow of the red bulb, he worked faster than ever. Chemicals sloshed in the tray, his hands trembling. He muttered under his breath, half prayer, half apology. The image swam into being, slow and inevitable. At first, relief. It was only him, his tired face, the slump of his shoulders, his weary eyes staring into the lens. But then, behind him, a figure, charred flesh peeling in strips, smoke curling from its arms. Hollow eyes staring straight into the camera, straight through the paper, straight into him. Its hand hovered above his shoulder, fingers warped and blackened, almost touching. Lucas staggered back, the tray tipping, chemicals spilling across the floor, his throat locked, air scraping. The photograph dangled from the clip, water droplets sliding down its surface like tears. The burned figure remained, frozen but alive. And then, the voice, not from the room, not from the hall, from the photograph itself. "Help us, Lucas. We want to leave." The words seeped out like smoke, curling into his ears, into his lungs. His knees buckled. He clutched the counter, eyes locked on the photo. The burned figure's mouth had opened wider than before. Its lips cracked, teeth blackened, but the words kept coming. "You can free us. Just one more picture." Lucas sobbed, shaking his head. No, I can't." The photograph fluttered on its clip, though no air moved. The other prints swayed with it, paper rustling like whispers. And all at once, they spoke together. "One more, Lucas. One more." The sound rolled through the darkroom like a chorus of ash. Lucas covered his ears, but the words lodged inside his skull, rattling against bone. He looked to the camera. It waited. Its black lens gleamed with hunger. The voices would not stop. Every photograph in the darkroom swayed, their paper edges fluttering though the air was still. Their whispers rattled together, overlapping into a single, suffocating chant. "One more. One more. One more." Lucas pressed his palms over his ears, but the words burrowed into him, vibrating through bone, curling around his thoughts. He staggered toward the door, but his legs buckled, his eyes fixed on the old camera resting on its tripod. The lens glared, a black pupil, patient and hungry. and his hand reached for it. The first shot shook him. Click. He didn't even know what he'd aimed at. His own trembling reflection in the bathroom mirror, the hallway with its crooked lamp. It didn't matter. In the tray, the image bloomed with dreadful patience. The hallway, yes, but halfway down its length, a figure stepped forward, charred skin sloughing away, hollow eyes wide. It wasn't frozen. Lucas swore the image moved, shoulders rising with a slow, labored breath. He tore the photo from the clip, crumpled it in his fist. But when he looked up, the figure remained on the drying line, whole again, smiling. He shot another. Click. The kitchen this time. When the print emerged, the figure was there again, closer, crouched against the counter like an animal. Its teeth gleamed, cracked and black, a grin too wide for its ruined face. Lucas retched into the sink, bile burning his throat. But even through the sound of his heaving, the whispers carried. Closer, closer. His shot again, disparity, shaking. Click. This time, the photograph showed his bedroom. The bed sheets tangled, the lamp knocked sideways, and beside the bed, standing perfectly still, was himself, or what looked like him. A second Lucas, half burned, eyes empty, staring into the lens. Lucas screamed, ripping the print apart with trembling hands. Pieces fell into the chemical trays, bleeding into the water like ash. But when he looked up, the shredded photo had already reformed on the line, whole, watching. The voices rose higher, layered, desperate. One more, Lucas. One more. Closer, closer. The camera on the tripod trembled, metal rattling as though it strained to move on its own. Its lens tilted toward him, centering him in its black gaze. Lucas stumbled backward, heart battering against his ribs. No, stop this. But even as he shouted, his finger pressed the shutter. Click. This time, he didn't need to wait for the development. The photo slid from the camera itself, glossy and instant, though no such mechanism existed. It dropped at his feet, wet and smoking. Lucas bent slowly, unwilling, his breath shallow. He picked it up with shaking hands. The photograph showed him, not in the chair, not in the hallway, but here, in the dark room, and behind him, leaning over his shoulder, the burned figure stared into the camera with its hollow eyes. Its mouth stretched open wider, wider, until it seemed to spill off the paper itself. Something warm brushed his shoulder. Lucas froze. His stomach collapsed inward. Slowly, he turned. The room was empty, but in the photograph, the burned figure's hand rested on him. Fingers curled, blackened, already gripping. And in the silence, the voices hushed to a single, intimate breath. Almost free, Lucas staggered from the dark room, the photograph still burning in his hand. The charred fingers gripping his shoulder seemed to press deeper with every breath he took. Though he knew it was only paper, he threw the picture to the floor, stomped on it until it tore. But when he looked again, the pieces had slid back together, whole once more, the burned figure smiling faintly from the emulsion. No, he rasped. His voice cracked, raw with panic. No more. He seized the camera from its tripod, metal scorching his palms. With a roar, he hurled it against the wall. The crack of impact shook the room, plaster dust raining down. But when the camera hit the floor, it did not shatter. It sat upright, unscathed. Its lens pointed directly at him. Click. Lucas froze. His stomach turned to stone. At his feet, another photograph slid out. Glossy, damp, steaming in the cold air. He bent unwillingly, his hands trembling as he lifted it. This one showed his kitchen. The burned figure was gone, but his own body lay on the floor, neck twisted, eyes black and hollow. Lucas screamed, tearing the photo in half. He hurled the camera into the sink, turned on the gas stove, and shoved both halves of the picture into the flame. Paper curled, blackened, turned to ash. Relief surged through him until he turned back to the drying line. The photograph hung there again, whole, untouched, and beside it, a new one swayed gently. Him, in the darkroom, right now, his hands on the stove, his eyes wide with terror. Behind him, the burned family loomed in full, all four figures pressing forward, their mouths open as though mid-scream. He spun around, heart hammering. The room was empty, but the photographs told a different truth. And then the camera clicked again, though no one touched it. Click. Another picture slid free, curling on the floor. Lucas bent with shaking hands and turned it over. His own face stared back, but burned. Charred black, hollow eye sockets weeping smoke. The mouth curved upward in a smile too wide to ever belong to him. Lucas dropped the photo. His knees gave out, and he slumped against the counter, sobbing. Please, please stop. The voices whispered all around him, soft as ash drifting. One more, one more, one more. Click. The dark room door slammed shut. Weeks later, the apartment was quiet. Neighbors complained of strange smells, smoke, chemical rot, but when police finally broke the door, the place was empty. No body, no sign of Lucas at all. Only the dark room remained. The drying line was full, swaying gently, and on every photograph, the same burned face stared outward, smiling. On the desk sat the camera, scorched but pristine, its lens fixed on the door as though waiting for the next visitor. Click. Story 7. The house on the hill. They were told not to buy it. Not in words that claimed no one in the village dared speak so directly, but in fragments, in half-formed warnings that clung to every smile. At the cafe, when Tom mentioned the property on the hill, the waitress had paused mid-pour. Her hand trembled just enough for coffee to splash across the saucer. She forced a smile, wiped it quickly, and murmured, "It's a long way from town. Lonely, that's all." At the hardware store, Anna asked about paint for old plaster. The owner frowned at her choice of color, then said softly, "Houses, remember, best not to cover everything." Even the realtor, all bright cheer and fast pen strokes, avoided meeting their eyes as they signed. She gathered the paperwork too quickly, as if contact with it might leave a mark. But the price was impossibly low, and from the road below, the house looked like it had been waiting for them. The drive up was narrow, curling around the hillside. The tires hummed against gravel, and the car shuddered with each bend. Anna stared through the windshield, lips pressed tight. "Feels far," she murmured. Tom grinned, one hand on the wheel. "Far means quiet. Far means no neighbors complaining when I play music too loud." Her gaze lingered on the silhouette of the hilltop, angular, tall, dark against the pale sky. Something about the way it stood unsettled her. The house didn't lean or sag. It braced itself, like a creature poised. Different, she thought. Not welcoming, just waiting. Inside, the air was stale but not foul. Dust lay thick in corners, but the scent was closer to earth than rot, as though the house had been breathing underground all these years. They carried boxes into the kitchen. Anna reached to open a cupboard and froze. Inside, dishes lined the shelves, porcelain patterned with faded blue flowers, delicate, hairline cracks webbing their surfaces. "These aren't ours," she whispered. Tom brushed past, setting a box down with a grunt. "Old junk. We'll clear it later." Anna lifted a plate. The ceramic was warm, though her fingers were cold. She set it back quickly. That night, the house moved with them. Tom climbed the stairs with a box in his arms. The steps groaned, but not from weight. Each creak echoed upward like a sigh. Anna followed, clutching her sweater, eyes darting to the shadows along the banister. Their bedroom smelled faintly of wood smoke, though the fireplace hadn't been lit in years. The wallpaper peeled in long strips, but beneath it, fresh plaster shone as though it had been laid yesterday. They lay in bed together, listening. The house didn't sleep. The window latch clicked open on its own. The wall beside the bed grew warm, radiating heat against Tom's arm. He murmured in his sleep, brow furrowing. Anna touched the plaster and felt it pulse faintly, like flesh under fever. She withdrew her hand, shivering. The second morning, she laughed in the kitchen when Tom made a clumsy joke. Sunlight broke suddenly through the clouds, flooding the room. That evening, when Tom grew frustrated with a stuck drawer, the floorboards shuddered beneath his feet, groaning in sympathy. They exchanged uneasy glances. "It's like it knows us," Anna whispered. Tom forced a smile, but his jaw was tight. "Then let's give it something good to know." But the walls disagreed. When their voices rose in their first argument, fine cracks webbed silently across the plaster, branching like veins. The house was listening, and it wanted more. At first, the house was subtle. When Anna cooked, she found the stove already warm before she touched the dial. When Tom worked late in the study, The lamp brightened without his hand on the switch. Small comforts, as if the house wanted to please them, but comfort has a way of turning sharp. One evening, rain rattled the windows. Anna folded laundry on the couch, the television murmuring low in the background. Tom came in, shoulders tense, muttering about bills. Their words tangled her worry against his exhaustion, his sharp tone against her silence. The house shifted with them. The air thickened, pressing against their chests like a second argument. The ceiling beams groaned overhead, long and low, vibrating with each raised voice. When Tom slammed his palm against the table, a hairline crack spread across the wall behind him, jagged as lightning. Both froze. Anna whispered, "Tom, did you see?" But the house sighed, deep and guttural, swallowing her words. That night, Anna dreamed of whispers. They slid through the walls like wind, curling around the bed. "Don't fight. Don't leave. Stay." She woke with her hand clenched tight around Tom's arm. His skin was clammy. The wall behind him was damp, as though it had sweated through the plaster. She pressed her palm against it. It pulsed faintly, like something breathing beneath. The next morning she found a message. In the condensation, on the bathroom mirror, letters had formed, not traced by her hand, not shaped by steam alone. "Stay." She rubbed at it frantically, but the word remained, etched deeper with each pass of her towel, as though carved into the glass itself. When Tom came in, she said nothing. He only looked at her pale face, then at the mirror. His jaw tightened, but he didn't ask. Some truths were too heavy to speak aloud. Days bled together. The house learned their rhythms. When Tom's temper flared, the radiators banged hot, scalding the air. When Anna cried, the floorboards cooled until her toes numbed. The house absorbed everything, mirroring them, feeding on each pulse of anger, each crack of sorrow. Sometimes it whispered, not words, not always. Sometimes just a sigh between walls, a hush at the corner of a room. Other times clear as a voice against her ear. "Don't canal, please. Stay with me. Forever." Anna told herself she imagined it. Tom refused to admit he heard it too. But both of them grew quieter, warier, as if speaking too loud might provoke it. One night, Tom woke to find Anna standing at the window, her hand pressed against the glass. "What are you doing?" he whispered. She didn't turn. Her breath fogged the pain. "It's watching," she murmured. Tom rose, heart hammering. Outside, the hill sloped away into darkness. No lights, no movement, only the silhouette of the trees swaying in the wind. He pulled her back gently. Her skin was ice. Behind them, the wall groaned, deep and resonant, a sound like approval. They stopped laughing in the house. They stopped whispering about leaving, because the house had made it clear. It wanted them, not as guests, but as nourishment. The days grew brittle. Tom and Anna moved through the house like actors in a fragile play, each word rehearsed, each step measured. They learned that raising their voices invited cracks in the walls. They learned that silence, too, had weight, the kind that pressed against their lungs until breathing felt like betrayal. So they spoke softly, too softly. Anna's laugh shrank to a whisper of what it had been. Tom stopped humming while he shaved. Meals passed with little sound but the scrape of cutlery, and even that seemed to make the floorboards twitch. It was as if the house had placed its palm over their mouths, teaching them how to suffocate slowly. Anna tried to write. She sat at the kitchen table with her notebook, pen poised above the page. The house was still, listening. She scrawled, "We should leave." The ink bled wide, the words smearing before her eyes. She blinked hard. When she looked again, the sentence had warped. "We should stay." Her hand trembled so violently she tore the page out, crumpled it. The ball of paper pulsed faintly in her palm, warm as living flesh. She screamed and hurled it into the trash. The trash bin shuddered once, satisfied. Tom grew restless. He wandered from room to room, pacing like a man in a cage. The house responded to his agitation, floorboards flexing, doors swelling shut behind him. He took to carrying a hammer from his toolbox, muttering that he would smash a window if it came to it, but the windows never held still long enough. When he raised his hand, the glass rippled like water. The reflection staring back was not his own, but gaunt, sunken, and smiling faintly. He lowered the hammer each time, retreating, sweat dripping down his neck. At night, he whispered to Anna in bed, "If we fight, it gets stronger. If we stay quiet, it waits. What does it want from us?" The house answered before she could. Everything. The word came from the vents, crawling between them like a third presence in their sheets. Sleep was no refuge. Anna dreamed of walls that bled, plaster oozing dark sap that smelled of rust. Tom dreamed of staircases that twisted endlessly, pulling him upward until his legs failed. Each time they woke, the house hummed faintly, as though savoring the echoes of their terror. They stopped touching each other. The first time Tom reached for her hand at the dinner table, the cutlery rattled in protest, a sharp metallic warning. The air grew hot, almost scalding. They jerked apart like guilty children, and so they sat across from one another, hands folded tight in their laps, eyes never meeting for too long. The worst was the waiting. The house no longer needed to show its hunger with cracks or whispers. It had settled into them, patient, content to let their restraint rot them from the inside. They began to anticipate each other's slips, a sigh too heavy, a tone too sharp, and their gazes snapped together in fear not of each other, but of what the house would do if the dam broke. Anna felt her mind fray in the silence. Sometimes, she thought she heard her own voice from another room, calling Tom's name sweetly, coaxingly, but when she followed, the room would be empty, walls trembling as though they had swallowed the sound whole. Tom, meanwhile, grew obsessed with the locks. He checked them again and again, jiggling each handle, testing each latch. They always worked in daylight, but after sundown, no door yielded, no matter how he turned the key. One night, he pressed his ear to the front door and swore he heard breathing, not from outside, but from the door itself. By the end of that week, they understood. The house didn't just want their anger, it wanted the silence afterward. The guilt, the tension, it fed not only on the storm, but on the stillness that followed, the air sharp with things unsaid, their hearts beating out of rhythm, their eyes heavy with mistrust. It wanted them frayed, hollowed, reduced to nerves and whispers until they were no longer Tom and Anna at all, but just fuel. And as they lay in bed one night, eyes open, too afraid to sleep, they heard the walls murmur in unison. Almost, almost, forever. It began with the doors. One by one, they locked themselves. Tom turned the knobs until his palms blistered, until sweat stung his eyes, but each door only shuddered under his grip, swollen into its frame like bone knitting over a wound. Anna tried the windows. She slammed them with her fists, drove a chair against the glass, but the panes rippled like water and sealed again, unmarred. When she screamed for help, her voice bounced back at her, muffled and distorted, as though the walls had swallowed it whole. The house did not want them to leave. It wanted them to stay. That night, the whispers returned, not soft this time, not coaxing. They surged through the vents and floorboards, layered and urgent. "Don't go, don't leave me. Stay forever. Stay, stay, stay." The voices shook the plaster loose, dust snowing from the ceiling. Cracks webbed across the hallway walls, pulsing like veins. Tom grabbed Anna's hand, pulling her toward the staircase. "We'll break out upstairs through the roof if we have to." But the steps groaned under their weight, deeper and deeper, until each board split down the middle. The banister twisted in his grip, wood splintering into sharp teeth that bit his palm. He yanked his hand away, blood streaking the railing. The house shivered in delight. The air grew thick, hot one moment, cold the next, alternating with every heartbeat. Anna staggered, clutching her chest. "It's in us," she gasped. "It's Tom. It's inside us." He pulled her close, his own lungs heaving. He could feel it too, the way the house pressed against his ribs, sinking his breath with its pulse. Each inhale tasted of dust and mold. Each exhale echoed back from the walls. Their bodies were no longer their own. They were extensions of the structure. The whispers grew teeth. "Don't fight. Don't resist. Give me more." The cracks in the walls split wider, revealing darkness behind them. Not timber, not insulation, just void. A hollow black that breathed, exhaling damp air into the room. From the void came a low groan. Not wood nor stone, but something primal, hungry. Anna screamed, dragging Tom toward the kitchen. They hurled themselves against the back door together, their shoulders bruising from the effort. For a moment, the lock gave. Hope surged, but the door did not open outward. It swelled inward, the wood softening like flesh, closing around them. Tom staggered back, eyes wide. It's alive. Oh God, Anna, it's alive. The house laughed. It was not a sound of joy, but of walls grinding against one another, of nails ripping from wood. A deep rumble shook the floor, vibrating their bones. The kitchen tiles split, hairline cracks widening into jagged mouths. Through them seeped a black ooze, thick and slow, smelling of rust and soil. It spread across the floor, curling around their feet like roots seeking purchase. Anna shrieked, kicking free, dragging Tom toward the center of the room. The ceiling lowered, not collapsing, lowering, inch by inch. Plaster sagged, beams bowing, the space tightening around them. The house was closing in. Tom pulled Anna into his arms, shielding her as dust rained down. He shouted into the dark, voice raw, "What do you want from us?" The reply came from everywhere at once. Walls, floor, ceiling, the very air they breathed. "I want what you are. I want your anger, your sorrow, your fear. You are mine." The house shuddered with pleasure at the words, walls trembling like a beast exhaling. And then, softer, almost tender, "Stay with me, forever." The ceiling kept sinking. Dust poured into their hair, plaster snowing across their shoulders. The walls quivered, seams splitting wider until darkness oozed from every crack. The air reeked of soil and iron, thick enough to choke. Anna clawed at Tom's arm, her nails digging crescents into his skin. "It's closing in, Tom. It's going to crush us." He dragged her backward, but there was nowhere to go. Each step only carried them deeper into the narrowing space, the house bending itself inward, a throat tightening around its prey. The whispers had grown into a chorus, no longer soft, no longer coaxing. They thundered through the structure, overlapping, furious and eager. "Don't leave, don't leave, don't leave, stay." The windows rattled, their glass vibrating like teeth chattering. The floor swelled beneath their feet, bulging upward until tiles cracked and peeled away. Beneath was not foundation, not soil, but pulsing dark. Tom swung the hammer he'd carried, bashing it against the wall. The head sank into plaster as if striking damp clay. He pulled it back with a roar, but the wall closed over the hole instantly, swallowing the wound whole. Anna's scream tore from her throat. The house shuddered in pleasure. They stumbled into the living room. The fireplace yawned wide, flames blooming from its cold hearth without wood, without spark. The fire burned black, shadows licking outward, stretching like hands. Anna fell to her knees, sobbing. Tom dropped beside her, wrapping his arms around her as if they could shield one another. His voice was ragged, broken. "I won't let it take us. I won't." But the house answered with a groan so deep it shook their bones. The floor buckled. The walls leaned. And slowly, inexorably, they began to close. Plaster pressed against Tom's back. Anna's hair brushed the opposite wall. Their breaths came short, shallow, crushed between narrowing space. The whispers grew higher, shrill, a chant that drilled through their skulls. "Yours, mine, forever, forever, forever." The ceiling brushed the crowns of their heads. Splinters rained down, mingling with their tears. Anna screamed one last time, her voice raw with despair. Tom shouted with her, their cries colliding in the shrinking air. The house moaned, a sound like timbers breaking, like stones splitting under weight. And then the walls met. The hill stood silent the next morning. From the road below, the house looked unchanged, its roof jagged against the sky, its windows dark and watchful. But inside, the rooms were still. The air smelled faintly of dust and earth, as though no one had lived there in years. In the living room, the fireplace crackled though no wood burned. And if one stood very still, very quiet, they might hear it beneath the groan of settling timber, two voices, screaming still, or perhaps laughing. And there we are, 7 stories carried like whispers through the long hours of the night. Perhaps you felt the weight of the footsteps on the stairs, or the cold breath on the back of your neck. Perhaps you heard the voices soft, coaxing, telling you to stay just a little longer. But the stories end, and you're still here. The walls of your room are the same as they were before, aren't they? The floor hasn't shifted beneath you. The air hasn't grown heavier. If you're lucky, you'll drift into sleep soon, and the voices will fade with the turning of the hour. If you're not, well, then maybe the stories were not just stories after all. Until next time, dear listeners, keep the lights low, keep the night close, and remember, once a house, or a voice, or a shadow knows your name, it rarely forgets. Good night.